In a town forgotten by time, where trouble rides in with the wind and legends fade slower than scars. The brand still smelled of iron when Sorrel Keen woke. She came to with the sensation of heat that wasn't there anymore, memory heat. Phantom. Sizzle, the flesh knowledge that her body had been marked to outlast her voice. She lay on the pallet in the dim room behind the cobbler's shop, one arm crooked over her eyes, and listened to Hushwater breathe. The town exhaled in boards expanding. Hinges groaning, a mule stamping in the square, the creek muttering beyond the mill wheel. Morning. Morning was supposed to bring mercy. That was what the old women said when they rapped her shoulder last night, tutting at her stubbornness. Morning hems the dark back where it belongs. But the iron had been legal daylight, pressed against her by a deputy who smiled for the crowd. He'd called it a lesson. Sorrel let her arm fall and watched dust turn to gold in a seam of sun across the basin. The bandage made a stiff shoulder of her, and every breath scuffed at the pain like a boot at a scab. "Drink," said a voice near the door. It belonged to Cal Bricks, the cobbler whose backroom she rented by sweeping out his scraps and mending his talk. He held a chipped mug that steamed, and his eyes couldn't keep from skidding to the edge of the bandage where a hint of the welt showed, the edges more purple than red. "Smells like willow," Sorrel said. "Steeped it till the kettle argued with me. You'll take it." Cal tried on a gruffness that fit him like a borrowed coat. "Can't have you fainting in my doorway. Folks already stare enough when you pass." She sat up with care. The brand lay at the swell of her left shoulder, not over the heart. The deputy had considered that and chosen the next best place, visible when any sleeve slipped. The sigil was simple, a straight line crossed near the top like a pole with a pennant, the authorities' mark for dissident. The word for it in their ledgers was rebellion. They loved tall letters. "I wasn't rebellious," Sorrel said too. "The steam, I sang old songs." Cal scrubbed a hand across his jaw. "You sang them loud. That's the trouble with truth. It forgets how to whisper." She sipped, and the willow climbed her throat in a bitter vine. "He said it was leniency." "I've seen their leniency," Cal muttered, pushing open the shutter so light could correct the room. "You got off with flesh because your voice buys custom. And because the warden likes to be praised for his mercy in front of the surveyor. When he rides through." He spat the word mercy as if it had gravel in it. "Elam Rusk is a man who polishes the badge before he looks at the mirror." Sorrel listened to the mill song, a steady hymn. Hushwater took its name from the same creek that fed the wheel and washed its sins downstream. When the authority built the dam south of town and posted their warden in a brick office with a clock on the wall and imported curtains, Hushwater had learned another song: register, ration, recite. Make your lines straight. Paint over the past with whitewash and call it tomorrow. When they'd taken the old shrine bells down from the Ridge Chapel, Sorrel had gone up alone at dusk and sung into the empty belfry. She had not thought of it as defiance. She had thought, briefly, stupidly, that memory deserved air. "They will watch you," Cal said. "Today more than yesterday. Let them." Sorrel set the mug aside and tested her shoulder. The skin tugged like a poorly sewn seam. "If I stay inside, they'll crowd outside to look. If I go out, they'll pretend not to stare. Between the two, I prefer the lie. Take the back lane to the mill. Lute's girl sent word last night, her baby's stubborn about arriving. Women need you." Cal's mouth softened around the truth of it. "We all do. Just keep your songs in your head for a spell." She smiled, a quick sideways thing that was more habit than joy. "You and the warden agree about that. I agree about wanting you unhurt." Cal bent to the trunk near the pallet and fished out the shawl she kept for days that bit. He offered it and did not look at her while she wrapped it high over the shoulder. "And I agree with Lute's girl's mother that the baby will come. When it decides. That makes you and me the choir and time the conductor." In the mirror propped against the wall, she caught a glimpse of herself. a long-cheeked woman with gray threaded-in brown hair that refused to lie down, eyes the color of the creek in shadow, and a mouth that other people had called brave before. The brand. Sorrel Keen. The name had always sounded to her like a reed underfoot alive, brittle, ready to sing if bent. She stepped into her boots. The left one had a stitched patch near the ankle where a nail had tried to insist on its nature. Cal had mended it so neatly she felt loyal to the boot in return. "I'll be back at dusk," she said, and Cal grunted, which in his language was a blessing. Hushwater's morning met her with the small courtesies of habit. The baker's wife turned the sign to fresh as Sorrel passed. Old Matty with the humped back raised 2 fingers from his stool by the well. Kids chalked a cooked hopline in the square, then stopped to watch her skirt the edge of their game. A dog decided her newsworthy and followed 2 alleys before remembering a prior commitment. To a bone. Women's faces leaned from windows when they heard the creek side-of-town midwife steps, and some of those faces flicked to the wrapped shoulder and away again in the same heartbeat. The warden's office watched the square from its brick vantage, white curtains a smirk in the window. A deputy with the polished smile Sorsby stood on the step, arms crossed and boredom pretending at power. His gaze slid across her like a knife laid on a table without comment. He could cut, and they both knew it. She kept walking and felt her brand itch under the shawl. A creature that did not want hiding. At the mill, the wheel turned with a sound like bread torn open. Lute himself, all arms and flour, met her with. Relief scoured onto his face. "Back room," he said, already returning to the lever. Mrs. Dennett said the pain started in the night and then made a fuss of leaving. I told her she always liked to be contrary. Women had gathered in the warm room where sacks of grain made temporary furniture. Mary Dennett lay on a pallet. Hair stuck to her temples, breath coming in snatched ropes. Her mother clucked and smoothed and scolded in one motion. "He keeps trying to come sideways," Mary said when she saw Sorrel, humor in pain, because she was that kind of woman. "Just like his father." "Then we will be twice wiser than the father today," Sorrel said, and knelt with slow care. For her shoulder. She took Mary's hand and placed the other on the taut drum of belly. "Let's borrow the creek's patience." A day could be carried by hands like this, by work that named itself correctly. Sorrel fell into the old rhythm, water warmed in a copper pot, clean cloths set within reach. 2 women trading stories softly over the laboring hum. Mary learning how to grieve the life she'd been before becoming more than one, and Sorrel's voice a rope on which the room could hang its weight without falling. She didn't sing. She spoke like wind through reeds. When Mary fought the pain like a thing to beat, Sorrel pressed the heel of her palm just so and spoke of trees that survive storms by leaning. When the baby seemed to think the world altogether too much and turned his shoulder to the light, Sorrel coaxed him with patient hands and told small lies, that the world was reasonable, that it could be kind, that the first thing he'd hear would be his mother's laugh. By late morning, the laugh arrived, cracked and surprised. The boy slid into Sorrel's hands with a furious wet squeak and a fist that opened like a star. He came face first to his life, as if he'd decided against sideways at the last, which boded well for all kinds of future mischief. Mary cried and laughed at once, as new mothers do, and Sorrel felt the ache go loose in her shoulder for a beat. Not gone but negotiated with. The brand was a word on her skin, but this was the grammar of her days, beginning, breath. The hawk's shadow gliding across the ceiling like a benediction. "You will have a name for him," Sorrel said when the boy had found his milk with astonishing competence. "Rook," Mary said without thinking, because he looked at me like he'd seen sky before. Then she startled at her own mouth. "No, that's foolish. We had Maria's and John's in mind. We have a list." "Rook suits him," Sorrel said, and felt the word click somewhere inside her as if a key had tested a lock. She didn't know why. She only knew the name tasted like distance and a horizon line. She washed and wrapped and whispered the string of small instructions that turn new parents into conspirators instead of bystanders. When she rose, the room had reassembled itself around the new heartbeat. The baby, exhausted from having invented himself, slept with the stubborn mouth of a satisfied thief. Lute pressed a loaf into Sorrel's hands as she left. "Warm," he said, "for your shoulder as much as your dinner." He didn't look at the bandage, which was a kindness. Outside, Hushwater wore early afternoon like a borrowed hat it was trying to keep from blowing away. Rumor blows faster than weather. Sorrel could feel the shape of talk in the way people didn't meet her eyes and then did, in the pockets of silence that formed and smoothed when she passed. She stopped at the well and let the bucket find its own wisdom in the dark. Water took hold of her reflection and shook it like a truth refusing to sit still. Keen. The voice was sun-colored metal. Sorsby, the deputy, had brought his smile to the well. "Warden Rusk expects your attendance at dusk." "Expectations are one of the cheaper luxuries," Sorrel said, lifting the bucket carefully. "Curfew is not a luxury. It's law." "Then perhaps compliance is weak-boned," she said before she could choose not to. She saw the flicker in his face that meant he'd remember the line. He leaned close. She smelled resin and paper and the polish they used on the office floor. "To make authority seem like order, you should be careful. The warden's mercy has a schedule. It does not repeat a performance." She held his gaze the way you hold a pan hot, briefly and with purpose. "Tell your warden I'll be at dusk where I always am, on the steps by the mill. Curfew finds me there? Then it finds me working. He can sign a citation for that." Sorsby's smile thinned to paper, but he stepped back. "Dusk," he said, as if he were the one who'd invented it. When he was gone, Sorrel leaned her forehead against the cool stone of the well wall and closed her eyes. She had built a life that was narrow and honest, a straight path between work and water, but the world kept sneaking in from the sides and asking her to be larger than she had planned. Her shoulder throbbed. She pressed the warm loaf there a moment and felt the heat negotiate with the ache. She took the back lanes. Home as Cal had asked, not out of fear but because walking under windows felt like giving away too much of herself for free. In the alley behind the apothecary, a boy crouched with a string and a bent nail, trying to fish a copper from the crack between stones. "Better to ask for it than to steal it," Sorrel said gently. He didn't look up. "Asking costs something." "Too," she considered, then squatted beside him, shoulder protesting. "May I help?" "You'll have to want it more than the crack does," he said, so seriously that she had to bite the inside of her cheek not to laugh. Between them, they coaxed the coin free. The boy turned it over in his palm as if it were a new moon. "You can't sing tonight," he said, matter of fact, like a priest reciting a rule. "I can breathe," Sorrel said. "Sometimes that is enough of a song." He looked at her shoulder then, and his eyes did the flinch that others' eyes had done all morning. "They marked you like a calf." "They tried to," she said, "but the rest of me refuses." He gave an abrupt nod. "Good." He pocketed the coin and vanished into the geometry of alleys, leaving Sorrel with the weight of the sentence that had decided to live in her ribs. The afternoon moved by in work that was both anchor and argument. Stitches in Cal's leather that would outlast their owners. Notes in Sorrel's careful ledger to make the world behave in lines and totals where it could not be tamed in law. A bowl of soup swallowed in 3 purposeful breaths, a shawl adjusted, so the edge of the brand could air without advertisement. When the shadows lengthen to that particular blue, that means the day has made up its mind. Sorrel washed her hands, bound her hair, and stepped into the street. Dusk braided Hushwater's noise into one rope. Mill wheel hush, mule complaint. Dish clatter, that thin sweet call of a child who has climbed higher than his courage. Sorrel took her place on the mill steps where she had been some evenings before to tell stories that were also instructions. How to set a broken wrist. How to coax a breech birth. How to boil a fever down until a child's skin returned itself. Word had always spread. It's the night the midwife speaks. People came as if truth was a kind of contraband they could pocket and share under blankets. Tonight they came with the sort of carefulness you use when walking past a sleeping dog with a history of biting. Faces gathered in the blue, the shape of a town deciding whether it was a crowd. The warden's men posted themselves near the square's corners with the bored menace of men who have been told to stand and look dangerous. The white curtains in Rusk's office were closed. Sorrel sat, then stood because the bandage pulled strange when she tried to speak sitting down. She looked at the faces and felt the courage she always borrowed from them come forward like a tide. She had promised Cal she'd keep her songs in her head. She had not promised silence. "We have 6 kinds of courage," she said, her voice steady, not loud. She counted with her fingers. The first is the courage to wake on a day that hurt you yesterday. The second is to ask for help before the asking breaks your teeth. The third is to tell the truth when a lie would be easier to carry. The fourth is to rest in plain sight. The fifth is to forgive your body for being just a body. The sixth, she paused and met eyes in the blue, Maddie's Lutz. Mary's with her child dozing crooked on her shoulder. The sixth is to keep a place for joy, even when grief thinks it leases your whole house. Someone coughed. Someone else cried quietly into a sleeve. The men at the corners shifted as if their boots had decided to be pebbles. Sorrel could have stopped there. She could have told a story about the correct angle of a splint. She could have recited the law about boiling water. But the day had branded her with letters bigger than her body, and something in her refused to be spelled by someone else. She did not sing. She hummed. It was small at first, the way a creek begins under roots an old mountain. Air she'd learned from a woman who'd had more children than anyone could count because grief and love had agreed to live under the same roof. Sorrel's hum found the curve of the evening and leaned there. The air seemed to hold its breath, as if sound had raised a hand and asked the town to listen. Sorsby stepped forward as if to remind everyone that humming was too close to singing, to be legal. He opened his mouth to say something that would sound official. That was when the first rider came. He appeared from the south road where the lowland grass unbuttoned itself into plain. A black mark becoming man and horse. He did not ride like a messenger. He rode like a verdict. 2 more flanked him, then 5, then 10, a string of dust and leather that moved as one thought. They were not the warden's men. Their coats told that, patched with their own history instead of issued by a storehouse. Their long guns told it more, and their banner, the slashed cloth that flapped from a lance, told it plainly. The Pike, Garin Pike's riders. Raiders who made a living out of turning other people's lives into merchandise. The square folded in on itself without any agreed-upon word. Mothers clutched children. Men reached for tools that could pretend to be weapons. The authority deputies went still the way men do when they consider whether salary covers this. Garin Pike himself dismounted with a slowness that said the ground should be proud. He had the lazy smile of men who've never been told no until it made a sound. His hair was the expensive kind of dirty, and his boots had filigree to inform the dust of its place. Evening, he said, like he carried the patent on the word. We come with commerce and courtesy. You'll give us bread, fodder, and a little song for the road. His eyes found Sorrel the way hawks find the field mouse. I was promised a nightingale. Sorsby stepped into the space where bravery wished to stand. This town is under the authorities' protection. His voice cracked on protection as if it had hit a stone, because everyone knew the authorities' protection arrived in minutes when the law was offended and in days when people were dying. He took another step. You. Pike didn't even lift a hand. One of his men did, and Sorsby slammed against the well with a thud that knocked the word from him. A whip. Sorrel realized the sound after the fact. The man coiled it again with a smirk like there was something wholly in pain. Pike's smile didn't change shape. We talk to the person who knows how to talk, he said mildly. That would be the woman who has been teaching courage to a cul-de-sac. He tipped his chin at Sorrel. Come down. She did not move. He let the smile go. His voice sharpened to the thing under it. You have two choices, Nightingale. You come down and sing a song, or I teach the square to sing for you. He jerked his head, and 3 of his riders lifted their rifles in lazy arcs until they looked. The square in its eyes. No law out here but the law we can carry. Hushwater held its breath like a child hiding under a bed. Sorrel felt the sensation she'd had on the ridge, when she'd sung into the bell-less tower, the sense that air could be made to remember. Her shoulder throbbed. Her breath found the place where steadiness lives when you need to borrow it. She stepped down one stair, then another. The blue deepened toward night and swallowed her shadow. Pike watched with avid satisfaction. There, he said, as if he'd been the one to decide the shape of gravity. Something simple. Something sweet. You give me a lullaby and I take my boys and go. I'm merciful that way. Ask anyone. Sorrel looked at Hushwater, at Maddie's hunched courage, at Mary's stubborn jaw with the baby's head a dark comma on her shoulder, at Cal in the back with his hands in fists like boots that had run out of road. She looked at the warden's office with its white curtains closed like eyelids. All right, she said, because there are moments when defiance is just another way of daring someone else to bleed for you. But the song belongs to the town. Pike spread his hands. Just so long as it belongs to me tonight. Sorrel took a breath and tasted fear. Fear had the oddest flavor like old tin and rosemary and the place between words. Pike didn't even lift a hand. One of his men did, and Sorsby slammed against the well with a thud that knocked the word from him. A whip. Sorrel realized the sound after the fact. The man coiled it again with a smirk like there was something wholly in pain. Pike's smile didn't change shape. We talk to the person who knows how to talk, he said mildly. That would be the woman who has been teaching courage to a cul-de-sac. He tipped his chin at Sorrel. Come down. She did not move. He let the smile go. His voice sharpened to the thing under it. You have two choices, Nightingale. You come down and sing a song, or I teach the square to sing for you. He jerked his head, and 3 of his riders lifted their rifles in lazy arcs until they looked. The square in its eyes. No law out here but the law we can carry. Hushwater held its breath like a child hiding under a bed. Sorrel felt the sensation she'd had on the ridge, when she'd sung into the bell-less tower, the sense that air could be made to remember. Her shoulder throbbed. Her breath found the place where steadiness lives when you need to borrow it. She stepped down one stair, then another. The blue deepened toward night and swallowed her shadow. Pike watched with avid satisfaction. There, he said, as if he'd been the one to decide the shape of gravity. Something simple. Something sweet. You give me a lullaby and I take my boys and go. I'm merciful that way. Ask anyone. Sorrel looked at Hushwater, at Maddie's hunched courage, at Mary's stubborn jaw with the baby's head a dark comma on her shoulder, at Cal in the back with his hands in fists like boots that had run out of road. She looked at the warden's office with its white curtains closed like eyelids. All right, she said, because there are moments when defiance is just another way of daring someone else to bleed for you. But the song belongs to the town. Pike spread his hands. Just so long as it belongs to me tonight. Sorrel took a breath and tasted fear. Fear had the oddest flavor like old tin and rosemary and the place between words. She set her feet and let her hum find a key. Then she sang. It wasn't a rebel song. It wasn't even one of the old songs the authority had banned for containing instructions disguised as love. It was a lullaby that farmers hummed to calves and mothers, to children and whole towns to themselves when winter came too early. It managed the trick of belonging to whoever listened. It was, if a song can be a verb, sheltering. The sound moved across the square the way mist moves across a low field, And something happened that Sorrel had learned about in other contexts. But never with men and guns watching. Bodies remembered. Shoulders unclenched a fraction. Breaths dropped from throats back into bellies. A baby's fuss shifted keys and then went silent against a mother's collar. Even the deputy's boots loosened their nails. Pike's mouth tilted. That'll do. He glanced at his men as if to say, "See how I make art do me favors. You got honey in it. Now dress it in something spicier." Sorrel kept singing. She had not chosen the lullaby because it was safe. She had chosen it because it existed in the same place as fear and did not refuse to share. She moved verses like hands, slow enough to create a space, steady enough to teach the air what to do with itself. She felt the baby in Mary's arms sigh into sleep, and something in her unlocked further. The way a window unlatches in a house that thought it had no more openings. It should have ended there. The song given, the men riding out with bread and arrogance, the town left with a bruise rather than a wound. But Garin Pike was made of the part of the world that cannot let gentleness pass without trying to break it to see what it's made of. Horse won't settle. One of his men called from the line. The rider sat a rangy roan with whites around. The eyes that gave him an expression nearer to opinion than horses usually bother with. Even from the steps, Sorrel could see the animal was tired wrong too. Much spur and not enough water. Pike turned his smile on the horse, as if he were charming. "A table." "We're working," he said, and the horse side-eyed him with the kind of intelligence that does not care for men like that. Pike's jaw twitched. He took 2 steps and laid a hand on the roan's neck. The horse flinched and stamped. "I said settle." Pike murmured and jerked the reins hard. Sorrel's song faltered a fraction over a word. She had always loved horses in the way you love rivers, for the parts of themselves that refuse ownership. The roan's mouth pulled against the bit, white showing, and the rider jammed a heel into the ribs like ignorance given spurs. Sorrel didn't change the song. She changed who it belonged to. She let the melody fall the way water falls when it stops trying to be a sheet and becomes a line. She aimed it, not at the men, not at the town, but at the creature who'd been asked to carry someone else's violence all day. She gave up words. No one needed those. She held sound the way you hold a frightened foal's face between your palms so it can feel the yes of your bones. The roan's ears flicked forward. That was all at first, just a small betrayal of rage. Then the head that had been fighting for altitude lowered an inch. 2. The breath that had been scraping at ribs found a way to widen. In the space of one held note, the horse's body remembered. There was an exit door that did not involve hitting or running. Knees softened. The animal folded into itself with the grace of water finding water. He knelt. The square breathed one sound, the ah of wonder that people try to call superstition when it doesn't fit a tally. The rider swore and yanked at the reins like he could edit what had happened. Pike went very still. Sorrel kept the note. Steady, not triumph but invitation. She wasn't thinking of miracles. She was thinking of a collarbone to rest a head on, of the place under the ear where horses keep the truth of themselves, if they are lucky. Her shoulder throbbed and then freed itself, and she wondered what her brand made of this, what the word. Rebellion thought of a horse choosing to kneel for a song. "Which?" someone in Pike's line hissed. The words slid across the square like oil. Someone else spat to balance their fear. The roan sighed, that great soft horse sound that means the body has decided to gamble on release. Pike smiled again, but now it showed teeth that had opinions. He looked at Sorrel as if she had taken a coin from his pocket while telling him a joke he enjoyed. "Stand her up," he said too softly. 2 riders stepped forward like doors slamming. Sorrel stopped singing because she would need breath for something else. She had time to register 3 things at once. Mary shifting the baby behind her body like a shield. Cal moving without looking like a man who had finally chosen where to spend his life. And a stranger extracting himself from the shadow at the edge of the square, as if he had been poured there and was merely adopting a shape. She had not noticed him before. That was the first oddity. He was built like a restatement rather than a spectacle, broad-shouldered, long in the leg in a way that looked designed for distance, not for impressing a street. He wore dust like other men wore jackets. His hat sat low enough to make a sentence of his jaw, and his horse gray, plain-faced, ears torn by some old argument stood as if he knew that stillness is a kind of noise when other things rushed out. The stranger swung down with the economy of someone who calculated calories when he moved. His eyes flicked to Sorrel and away, not because she was uninteresting, but because his mind was doing a list: exits, angles, distances, how the roan would stand if he were asked politely. A scout, Sorrel. You. The word was only breath between them, his eyes on hers like a hand passing a torch. And then everything moved at once. Rifles climbed toward shoulders. Boots rasped on grit. The gray horse's hide tightened under dust like muscle, deciding not to be merely muscle. Sorrel's whole body listened in a way that felt older than language, older even than fear. She did not think. She obeyed the physics of Rook's gaze. She dropped to the step below as the first shot cracked. The gray was faster. He flowed sideways and shouldered her with the patience of a river finding a new bank, bodies fitting for an instant in the kavua. Impossible geometry between bullets. The round struck stone and made a stinging rain of grit. Sorrel tasted limestone and the old iron of panic and felt her brand flare as if the shot had called its heat back through skin in time. Rook moved with the kind of economy that means a man still has miles to pay for. He didn't go for his gun. First, he went for angles. One hand closed on Sorrel's forearm, warm, steady, unarguable, while the other found the knot of the gray's reins and flicked it loose in the same motion his body made to draw her in behind the animal's shield. She felt the tug of his grip, not as possession but as root. Down, he said. But the word was already unnecessary. She was there. Pike's men fired again. The crack came layered, first from the rifles and then from the square itself. Shutters slamming shut. A child's involuntary scream strangled it into cloth. The mill's wheel ticking as if the day itself had hiccuped. A deputy Sorsby made the brave mistake of stepping into the open with his badge held like a prayer. The whip found him before the bullet did. He went to his knees with a curse peeled away to a sound a man makes when a tendon gives up. Hold. Your line, Garen Pike said without raising his voice. He didn't have to. His men's fear was trained to come when summoned. He wasn't looking at them anyway. He was looking at Rook, measuring the kind of man who corrected a square with a single step. Rook answered measurement with subtraction. He took the space Pike thought he owned and spent it. The gray surged. Not a charge, no wasted thunder, but a glide into the friction of the moment, the way a blade moves when its owner already knows where bone will be. He cut the line between the two men reaching for Sorrel and the woman herself, then turned the cut into a gate only he could open. Behind. "Me," he said. And the words fit the shape of her fear, as if they'd been fitted in some colder room, where choices are coins and silence is the cashier. Sorrel obeyed. Her body had a memory of obedience when it made this kind of sense. She kept the mill to her left shoulder, the gray to her right, and Rook exactly where his presence could be both wall and path. She did not sing. She did not need to. Her breath found a pace to match the gray's ribs and stayed there because it was something she could keep. The roan that had knelt for her song stood with the unevenness of an apology and then, astonishingly, stepped sideways into his rider's leg with the deliberateness of a creature who has renegotiated terms. The man swore, and his rifle's muzzle skated a degree off true. A degree is a country when lead flies. The bullet intended. For Rook ricocheted off the mill's iron lever and rang the square like a bell that meant don't. "Take her," Pike said softly, Disdain curled around boredom, as if he were correcting a servant. "Or take the hand you fail with and put it on my table." "That's enough," Rook replied, and the tone made even the deputies look at him, as if an older law had walked into the room. 3 of Pike's men dismounted at once. They moved, in a shape meant to be seen as competence. Rook did not watch their hands, he watched their feet. The first man's left boot toed inward, old ankle break, weak pivot. The second flicked his spur like a habit that meant his hips would drift a breath to the right when he stepped. The third breath too high, the breath of men who've put their bravery in their mouth and don't know how to get it back to their lungs. Rook didn't draw clean. He drew ugly, the way men who don't mistake show for speed do it. A click where there should have been silence, a hitch that made a nervous eye blink, and then 3 shots that sounded like one decision. First man's rifle kissed the dirt. Second man's hat left his head as if it were relieved to be done with him. Third man's hand forgot how to be a hand. "Move," Rook said to Sorrel, and she moved. They took the side of the square that knew shortcuts. Rook's hand found the small of her back and changed her path by inches that measured themselves as yards in the math of survival. Bullets bit plaster behind them and chewed at the lip of the mill's trough. The gray took a narrow alley as if he'd built it himself. A mule panicked and made the choice to fill the world with itself. Rook spoke to it without words, a motion of palm that meant stay and had been practicing meaning for years. The mule stayed. "You can't take her." Pike observed to the night as if it were a ledger that had made an error. "She belongs to my story." "Not tonight," Rook said, and Sorrel felt the sentence land in her ribs like a door closing on a room she'd been kept in by invisible furniture. They cleared the last of the square's light. Blue turned to the kind of dusk that imposes. It's grammar on people who thought they knew how to speak evening. The back lane past the apothecary tasted of mint and ash. Cal's shutters were unhooked. A knife stuck in the jamb to hold them steady. Sorrel wanted and did not want to look. She wanted to see him, to be seen, to be told in that rough sanded Cal way that this was sensible. She kept moving. The first rule of living is always the first rule. If the road opens, take it before it remembers its priorities. "Rook," Sorrel said, because naming a man in a running moment is either a spell or an apology. "That your name or your work?" "Both," he said without turning. His voice had a shape like maps, the edges of countries a finger has learned by tracing. "Which one I am depends on who's asking." "I'm Sorrel Keen," she said, and the gray flicked an ear back at the words as if names were the sort of thing horses used to check distances. "I know," he said, which unsettled her more than gunfire. They reached the back of Cal's shop. Just as a shot skipped off the corner and knocked a line of nails out of a board someone had saved for some day. Sorrel flinched reflexively, guilt eating its usual circle in her stomach. How much of this was because she'd hummed? How much because she refused to stand straight when told? And Rook's hand was already there, steadier than a promise, reminding her that math has terms you don't get to pick, but you can still choose where the equal sign goes. "Mount," he said, and the gray turned himself into a staircase. Pain made her shortest. The bandage tugged, the brand argued, and for a blink she could hear Sorsby's soft threat about mercy with the schedule. Then Rook's palm was under her boot and lifting with a strength that did not announce itself because it had nothing to prove. Sorrel swung and landed behind the saddle as if she had been rehearsing this. With some other life, she expected the gray to shy at the extra weight, or protest like the men in uniforms did when a shift broke their clean lines. He only adjusted with the competence of a creature who has counted worse days and found himself equal to them. Rook took the reins short and turned the gray on the heel like a thought changing its mind. "Duck," he said, and Sorrel's spine obliged before her mind did. The whip's lash cut the air where her head had been, and the man holding it discovered his balance had other hobbies. "Go!" Someone in Pike's line barked, but the word hit the alley after Rook's horse had left it. They blew into the stables lane and out to the creek road, where the millrace spit water like a drunk who has been told to share. The gray slid down the slope with his hocks under him, neat as a cat negotiating a shelf. Sorrel's hands found the cantle, then Rook. She meant to keep her palms to the saddle like a promise to the horse. Her body overruled with an argument older than courtesy. Her fingers learned Rook's coat by the seams. The creek's voice grew. Water always tells when it is about to decide something. Rook aimed the gray at the shallow below the wheel where the bed is stone and the current goes soft to accommodate towns. Hooves found purchase and a map horses share with each other as gossip. Spray made the brand cold, and the shock told Sorrel she was alive again, which was absurd, because her heart had never stopped trying to break out of her like something improperly caged. A bullet hit the water near Rook's knee and turned into a tantrum of droplets. Another hissed through the willow branches so close to her ear, edited at a hair. She wanted to shrink into Rook's spine and also to stand up and tell the water to mind its own business. She did neither. She breathed and counted the grays. Strides, because numbers are how you keep panic from becoming your god. 70, Rook said conversationally into the dark, as if continuing an old talk both of them had been born into. 70 what? Sorrel managed, and heard her own voice come back smaller and meaner than she liked. Pain makes tone dishonest. Miles, he said, from here to the line. Give or take what the river stole this spring. The line, Sorrel repeated, and the word felt like the edge of a blade and the seam in a curtain and the thought you don't dare finish because it will be true if you do. Authority stops there because it can count, Rook said. Pike stops because he can't afford his reputation to cross and come back looking smaller. Why take me? It was out before she could ask it better. Not why help or why now or how did you know to come, the raw question. The animal. Asking the hand at her halter why the gate was open. Rook didn't answer at once. The gray climbed the far bank with the deliberation of a man carrying 2 suitcases and an opinion. When he spoke, the words came stripped to their small, sturdy parts. Because you kept singing when they marked you for it. Because you made a horse remember to be a horse in front of a man who collects forgetting. Because I was sent. By who? Wynn said the name before Rook did, as if it had been hovering in the willow leaves and waiting for confirmation. By people who think lions don't have to be where men with stamps put them, Rook said. Some call us scouts, some call us smugglers, I call us tired. But we do the work, and that work is me. She did not know whether to be angry at being a task or grateful enough to bite it with her teeth. That work is anybody the mark makes dangerous to the wrong thing, he said. You're dangerous to the wrong thing. Behind them, the square had found the sound of many boots trying to decide which direction courage keeps. Pike's men had chosen. The hoof thunder rolled flat along the road and made the night shake. In its pictures, Rook put the gray into a run like he was opening a letter he already knew the contents of, but needed to see the ink just the same. Sorrel sat the rhythm with the intimacy of somebody, letting a stranger set her heartbeat. The world narrowed to the dark braid of the creek road and the way the gray's shoulders spoke to the ground. Wind burned her eyes and tasted of ironweed and smoke and something else, the metallic tang of a storm dreaming itself into being. Far out over the plain, her shoulders screamed and then made a quiet she recognized from other labors. The silence a body makes when it remembers its job is to keep you through pain, not from it. How far to cover by sunrise? She asked, because measurements are kinds of mercy. 30 if nothing breaks, Rook said. 40 if the dark is honest. More if we leave them a puzzle. What kind of puzzle? The kind roads don't solve. They cut off the creek. Rode at the split where the authorities' mileposts began pretending to be trees and took the narrow that nobody with a cart had used since the flood year. The gray's ears found the old path, the way old men find the warm spot on a bench. Dry grass hissed against Sorrel's legs, whispering all the names it had for wind. Fireflies made an indecipherable code in the ditch. Sorrel hoped someone somewhere understood it. Hoofbeats came on the road they'd left and then hesitated, faced with choices. Rook eased the gray into a stand of sycamore and let silence pour over them like sand over a dropped ring. Sorrel felt the horse breathe. It calmed her more than any words could have. She watched Rook's thumb stroking the rein as if he were counting, and realized he was not numbers but heartbeats, not his own but theirs. Body turning measure into decision. Pike's riders pressed past on the creek road. The sound changed. You can hear when men intend to go through you rather than around. A smaller group peeled off onto the narrow, 4 or 5 by the sound of it. Rook's jaw made a small shape that could have been a smile and could have been a scar if she'd known him longer. Why are you smiling? She whispered, aided by fear into frankness. Because they sent men who like to be seen to follow a path that likes not to be, he said. You think in riddles, she murmured and meant respect, though tiredness put gravel in it. I think in maps, he said. Sometimes the shortest way out is the longest way around what a man thinks he owns. He nudged the gray forward at a walk so soft it more nearly resembled decision than motion. Sorrel felt branches comb her hair like a mother trying to fix a child's part in the hurry before church. A nightjar lifted ahead of them with an indignant croak that in daylight would have been laughter. Shots cracked back along the road, not at them. The sound angle was wrong. Authority deputies, she thought, or men with enough pride left to try. And enough luck to keep one of Pike's from noticing the difference between defiance and suicide. Sorrel's stomach tried to curl into itself. She wanted all the town to be alive when she came back, which the voice in her head that kept inconvenient lists pointed out might not be a plan the world respected. Cow, she said without intending to, just the name. It leaked out, a prayer that refused religious habits. He was the man with his shutters open, Rook said, and Sorrel turned the sentence over the way you turn a cut apple to see if it's bad all the way through. He had noticed everything she had not had time to. Teach your eyes to notice, will he? She couldn't finish it. Her mouth filled with willow, remembered and not. He'll use the knife he left there to open the palm of the day and pour it to the side he wants, Rook said. Some men know how to choose small wars they can win while big ones pretend. At them, the path turned mean with rocks where the creek had taken liberties in a storm and returned them carelessly. The gray managed it with the insulted dignity of a librarian asked to climb a fence. Sorrel's shoulder thudded in time with the horse's steps and kept a ledger of its complaint. Tell me about the line, she said to keep her body from telling her everything it wanted to. Not what it keeps out, what it lets in. Air, Rook said, and the simple of it hit her behind the breastbone. People who thought they were done being people. Names a man can say even when a clerk says he can't. Paper that says nothing about who you belong to. The chance to stand in a town square and be told no by ordinary life instead of by a man who rented a badge from fear. And what does it take away? She needed the cost. She was practical even when her lungs were listing. Unto you nows, he said. You get fewer of them because they're about to belong to us. To a we. You lose a certain kind of quiet if you were fond of the kind where no one knows you. You lose the possibility of pretending your choices don't point anywhere. And what do you get? Sorrel asked, because the child in her wouldn't be quiet until the woman made a promise to it. Work, Rook said. A place to add. Your hands to the fence so the next fire jumps the other way. A way to use the song you keep insisting on not calling a weapon. She wanted to tell him her song wasn't a weapon, not because she was afraid of weapons, but because weaponry sits in the hand one way and mercy another, and she had always wanted to be something that made space instead of holes. But the roan. Kneeling, the whip's crack, the square's breath returning, if that was not a fight done with music, what else would you name it? Call it a bridge then, she muttered, and felt his attention flick back like a sparrow through thorns. Bridges are weapons, he said. just against different enemies. They topped the rise where the sycamores thinned to the stubbled shoulder of the plain. The moon made a spare admission of itself above the hills, as if it didn't want to be caught participating. Wind came unbraided this far from town and lifted the sweat on Sorrel's throat into a shiver. Rook put the gray into a canter that ate distance without talking about it. Behind them, laughter rose bright and ugly. Pike's men had found the narrow path and remembered that cruelty can make a man feel acquainted with God. Sorrel did not. Look back. The gray's ears told her where the danger was. Rook's breathing told her how much of it he thought belonged to them, far ahead. A line of dark lay across the plain like a snake warming itself on a sun it had forgotten to return. Sorrel felt Rook's body register it before his hands did. "Fence," he said. "Old one. And beyond it?" "Beyond it the ground that used to be a ranch and is now a rumor. We take the gully that lies to the left, the one horses don't. Like because it smells like old water. The smell is lying. The water's gone. The smell stayed. It will make their mounts argue while ours remembers we've told it true before." Sorrel found herself smiling despite the ache. "You put truth in a horse like nails in a shoe. That's how you keep a road," he said. They reached the fence and Rook didn't slow. The gray bunched and rose, clean as breath in winter. Sorrel's stomach measured the arc and found it acceptable. Something in her shoulder protested, and was overruled by the rest of her. The gully smelled exactly as advertised, old water and a memory of fish. The gray dropped into it like a sentence sliding toward its verb. Sage brushed Sorrel's knees. A burrow flashed dark like an accusation, and then was gone. The sky widened above them into the kind of black that makes a person admit they are. Smaller than they've been making out to be. "Rook," she said when the quiet between hoofbeats and night had stretched long enough to make questions seem both rude and mandatory. "When you said you were sent." "Yes. Who told you my name?" "Two women whose hands smelled like bread and soap," he said. "And a boy who told me not to let you sing tonight." Sorrel surprised herself by laughing, a raw sound. "That sand did nothing. He told me the same." "Smart boy," Rook said. "Smart enough to sell me the back route out of the square, for a coin I didn't know I was willing to pay." "And you paid?" "I always pay boys who sell maps," he said. "If you don't, they grow up to sell guns." The gully turned under them. A night wind carried the voices of men who had not expected the land to argument with them. Horses snorted behind, angry at a smell that carried memory without evidence. Sorrel felt the more delicate anger in Pike's voice, as he realized the world had been rearranged without asking him permission. "How long before they find our way?" she asked. "Long enough to make the next mistake," Rook said. "What's the next mistake?" "They'll split and try to take the high ground on both sides," he said. "Which is good if you're shooting down, bad if the road is in the bottom of the world. Bottom roads like to move beneath a man when he thinks he's above them." They rode. Distance built itself under the gray's feet in quiet plans. Sorrel's mind laid its own planks. Cal with his knife and his shutters, and the way he says. Her name like he's repairing it in the saying. Mary asleep sitting up because infants rewrite time. Sorsby with his polished boredom and the twitch in his eye that betrays how much he wants to be a story. She hated all of them for a breath for making her a person who could be used to ruin them. Then she loved them so fiercely it had teeth. The two feelings shook hands. Her eyes stung with the political of it. "Talk to me," she said to Rook. Because words were a way to steer the self when the body is a passenger on speed. "Tell me a thing that puts weight in the right place." He didn't reach for a tale big enough to be expensive. He reached for the small coin that spends everywhere. "Gray likes carrots better than apples," he said. "He'll lie for apples. He tells the truth for carrots. He's particular about water in winter, and will pretend to be a poet about it if you let him. He believes fences are jokes unless wire is involved, and has the scars to demonstrate his research. His ears." Say more than most men's mouths, and he's the better for it. Sorrel laughed again and felt it do something useful to her ribs. And you? I am out of practice at company, he said. I listen to distances. I was taught that food is a sentence you finish, even if you don't like the grammar. I would rather argue with wind than with men because it's honest in a way a human isn't required to be. And you ride 70 miles to collect women with marks? Her tone landed harsher than she meant. Pain will tarnish anything that should shine. I ride 70 miles to correct a map, he said. Tonight the map has you on the wrong side of a line. They climbed out of the gully where rock gave way to hardpan. The plain opened like a book left face down and forgotten. Far off, a string of lights made a crooked seam in the dark. Rooks. Head tipped that way. Outpost, he said. Not authority, us. If we can make it before the horses behind us, remember their arguments are with their riders and not the ground. We eat. If not, we make the kind of plan you make when your choices. Put on masks and claim not to know you. Sorrel's back had seized into a single long sentence of ache. She shifted and found an arrangement of bones that promised to take its turn with the pain without needing a speech about it. The gray lifted into another gear. She felt it like a paragraph opening in the middle of a page where the author had been stingy. It happened in the space where the road made a suggestion, and the night pretended to agree. The shot no map can predict. No flash warned them, no horse told it first with an ear. It came from the ground's own hollow, a place where sound had been waiting, patient as a snake under laundry. The crack was a hand on the ear, and then the gray stumbled. Sorrel's world. Tilted. Hand she did not know she had went for Rook and found him. His shoulder drove up into her palms with a force that rewrote her spine. The gray caught himself because he was the sort of animal that takes care of the weight he's asked to carry, even when it's unfair. But something was wrong in the rhythm. It told itself wrong and tried to pretend otherwise, and then told the truth. Rook's exhale went knife-thin. Where? Sorrel said. Except she already knew because the gray's stride had become the math of a horse refusing to admit. How much leg belongs to pain? Fetlock, Rook said. One word. Knife-thin. 2. Nicked. Not through. Not through, she repeated, making the repetition carry the weight of an oath. We can. The second shot came later and sooner than it should have, like a liar correcting himself too quickly. It struck a rock 2 hands to their left, threw sparks that died of surprise, and taught them the shape of the shooter's nest. Rook had them off the line of it before the sparks had finished being a sermon. Down? Sorrel asked, tasting a plan that involved her feet and the ground, and a willingness to own more fear than was polite. No, Rook said, and turned the gray toward a slash in the land that hadn't been there when daylight made the map. It was a washout, new and mean, cut last month by a cloudburst. The authority would have filed under nuisance if the clerk had thought to ask a man who knew the ground what to write. Rook asked the gray for faith, and got it with interest. They dropped into the cut. The shot that would have taken Sorrel through the bandage hit the rim and scolded. Shrapnel at their hair. Rook did something with the reins that was both impossible and ordinary. It was simply the holding of them as if they were an argument he had time to win. The gray found a trot in a space no horse should have been able to trot in and kept his head low so as not to scold the stars with his ears. Who? Sorrel asked, because names matter when you owe pain to someone. Not Pikes. Rook said after a beat. Too patient, too quiet. Warden's men that didn't get the message about schedules. Or someone who's decided to collect favors in both directions. Rusk, she said, tasting the syllable for poison. The warden's curtains had been shut. Men like that keep eyes even when they pretend to sleep. And Sorsby if he wants a promotion and the urgent fiction of being important. Rook said. But Sorsby bleeds when he's near the pointy end of a story. My bet is a man who wants to keep his boots clean. They moved inside the washout like the world had abruptly remembered it could keep them. The gray's stride steadied as the pain realized it wasn't being asked to command. Rook's shoulder under Sorrel's hand told her as much about him as anything he'd said. The quiver he hid but didn't deny. The heat he didn't waste on making sure she knew how dangerous he was. The way his breath told the truth even when his words made thrift a religion. When the cut ended, the land rolled them into a patch of mesquite that had opinions about being disturbed. Rook let the gray stand and nose his reins and be a horse. He turned in the saddle just enough to look at Sorrel, and she saw the math of his face change, the subtraction of shock, the addition of intent that has decided it is cheaper to tell the truth now than later. "You're still able to make sound that moves animals?" he asked, which should have sounded like using her. Instead, it sounded like making a plan with all the parts and the shapes they came in. "Yes," she said, and heard her voice return to her with less tremor. "If I don't ask it to be pretty." "Pretty's for daylight," he said. "I need the absence of panic. There's a band of Fearals about a half-mile on. They live in the old swale where the colonists left the rocks piled like bad grammar. They don't owe men anything, which is why men tell stories about them being mean. They're not mean. They're remembering their own names. If we'll share the road, they'll share the miles. But they'll bolt at gunfire unless someone who sounds like water tells them not to. You want me to sing Wild Horses into letting us pass," Sorrel said carefully so as not to step on the part of her that still wanted the world to be ordinary. "I want you to talk to them like you did to that roan," he said. "Only this time with the dust in your mouth and the night in your throat. And if I can't, then we take the hard flat for longer than the gray owes us. And he pays for my debt with his leg," Rook said, not as a threat but as what it was, math that makes no adjustment for vanity. Sorrel's shoulder burned. Her heart did something that felt like kneeling from the inside. She nodded. "Let's go to your Fearals." They eased out of the mesquite and found the swale by the smell. First juniper and old salt and the faint clean stink of horse that hasn't had to listen to people. The stars slanted overhead like a hand closing gently, not to smother, but to ask for quiet. The ground gave under the gray's feet in the way that means some long ago river remembers what it was and resents the change politely. They saw the herd all at once and not at all. Eyes before bodies, breath before hooves. The animals were dark. Inside the dark, except where a blaze or a sock admitted to domestic ancestors the storybooks liked to pretend didn't matter. Heads lifted. A ripple ran through them like wind through wiregrass. Sorrel didn't sing. She set her mouth to the space sound. Comey's from when speech decides to work and took a breath that started in her heels. She gave the herd the kind of noise you make to newborns when you're telling them that yes, it is too much, but also yes, you have a hand they can fit inside. She kept it low and long and shaped like acceptance, not command. The lead mare cocked one ear. She was old enough to have opinions, and young enough to still be making them. The muscles around her eye said she thought the world was an idiot, but was willing to sign for deliveries if they were wrapped right. Sorrel put the sound exactly in the place between her ears and the night. "Easy," she whispered into the sound before it left her. "We're only a breath. We're only a shadow asking permission." The mare didn't move. Her herd flowed around her like a divided river. A bay colt with 3 white socks pretended not to care, and then cared so much he had to sniff the night. Open in 3 places at once. The gray held himself like an old teacher, letting the young do their homework wrong twice before remarks were necessary. Rook was stone under Sorrel's palm. She let the tone change the way water does when it finds a basin. Same song, lower bowl. She aimed not to persuade, but to allow. The mare let her head drop an inch. 2. She breathed out. The herd breathed with her. Sorrel felt the world accept a coin she hadn't been certain was legal tender. "Now," Rook said very softly, and put the gray into a walk that touched nothing. It didn't have to. Sorrel kept the sound in the air like a hallway. And the herd stepped aside as if the night itself had politely requested, "After you." Halfway through the herd, the wind changed. It carried with it the shape of Pike's riders and smell, and in the way sound sits on the ground when men who don't believe in animals ride them. The colt snorted and danced and made the kind of decision colts specialize in, the one that ends with a tumble and a story. Sorrel leaned into the note and felt it take her weight. The mare lifted her head a fraction, read the wind sentence for itself, and then wrote a different ending. The herd held. They passed like a rumor the town won't believe in the morning. Sorrel's throat ached from the effort of being gentler than she felt, and her shoulder had become a chapter she couldn't skip. Rook's hand found her knee for a second, a point of contact that meant good and also almost. She didn't know how to receive either, so she let her bones do it for her. They were almost clear when the shot came not from behind but ahead from the ridge that marked the limit of the old ranch and the beginning of the flats. No one could pretend to own, because the wind refused to do paperwork. The herd flinched, broke, reformed like a school of fish accidentally remembering it has legs. The gray rocked to a stop, and Rook's body spoke a word she didn't know but understood. "Ambush," he said, in the tone you used to name weather. Night to their right became three men a shape of hats and rifles, and the kind of stance that advertises lessons learned by flogging instead of by listening. To their left, another two. Ahead, the flicker of a lantern shielded by a hand that read as careful and cruel. Not Pike's riders, not authority uniforms. Men who rented their violence to the highest bidder and called themselves neutral in the mirror. One of them lifted the lantern just enough that Sorrel could see his mouth. It had the twist of someone who sells mercy to children and asks for change back. "Evening," he said. "Toll Road." Rook's breath went in and stayed there like a hand hovering over a hot pan. The gray lowered his head as if he'd dropped a tool and needed to pick it up again. Sorrel felt the wild horse's attention tighten to a single bright point, the way living things pay a debt of focus when something old and wrong enters the room. "Price?" Rook asked. One word, level as a board set on a mason's line. "Her," the man said, and smiled in a way that told Sorrel the world had error codes for men like him, and had run them all and still not managed to shut the machine down. And whatever she sang to make Pike's gelding pray. The gray's ear flicked back. Rook didn't move. Sorrel discovered there was a place under fear where heat lives. Not the brand's heat, but the kind of fire makes when it has decided to stop being polite to wood. She found she could stand there. She found she wanted to. "Bad price," Rook said. "Good profit," the man countered, and cocked his head at the two on the left. Rifles moved. The wild herd stepped a pace as one, putting their bodies between the nastiness and the two humans on a gray, who was holding his breath for them because he'd been asked to and because animals keep faith better than men deserve. Sorrel's mouth opened. The sound that came was not a lullaby and not a hymn and not any of the work songs she had made legal by leaving the edges off in public. It was a note she didn't know she owned until the year brought her to it, thin at first, then full, a wire string gone to bell. Not to the ambushers. Not to Rook. To the herd. She asked them for one more grace. The lead mare lifted her head, ears forward so hard they wrote lines in the dark. The bay colt squealed defiance because he was trying on all the coats in the closet at once. The herd stepped again, not away but forward. Ambushers looked at horses the way men who cannot read look at books, like a challenge they mean to beat with fists. They didn't notice the way the mass of animals had arranged itself to make lanes where no human could stand and own the space. "Last chance," the lantern man said, as if the world had ever been in the habit of giving him those words to hand. Out. Rook didn't answer him. He spoke to Sorrel, quiet as dry grass. "When I move, take the gray's mane and trust he's taller than what's coming. Duck on 3. On 2 I shoot the light. On 1 the horses run the road for us. If you Keep your sound, they won't trample us when the world forgets which way is up. She nodded, and the nod was assent and marriage and crime. She took a breath that made her ribs ask questions, and let the note sink to the place in the body where vows live. 3, Rook said, and the gray coiled. 2, he said, and Sorrel's sound became distance in front of them, a rope laid. Across the dark. 1, he said, and the night became a handful of shots, a smashed lantern, and the thunder of more hooves than any one person should be allowed to think about. The light exploded, and with it the shapes of men who had been holding themselves together on the fact of their own shadow. Darkness swallowed them and gave them back wrong. The herd went, not away but through, choosing the lane Sorrel's sound had lit and the gray's body remembered from other nights. When running was prayer, Sorrel dropped to the gray's neck before her mind could complain about splinters. Something hot licked her braids powder flash, and the smell of singed hair joined the catalog she hadn't consented to keep. Rook fired again, the sort of shot that sounds less like a choice than like a sentence a man speaks because not speaking it would betray too many dead. A man on the left spun and learned an urgent lesson about kneecaps. For a heartbeat, the world was only bodies moving in ways they hadn't been allowed to in years. Hoof thunder ate the argument. The ambushers discovered what happens when you try to tack something that speaks in more languages than money. A man screamed a sound too surprised to ask forgiveness. Another went quiet the way men go when a horse has selected them for experience, and the experience decides to take part of the man with it when it leaves. And then they were through, and the swale opened like a mouth agreeing to spit them into the flats. Sorrel's note frayed and held and frayed again. She tied it to the next breath and the next, and found there was still thread left. Rook's hand found the gray's neck, thanked it, and asked for more. The gray gave it because he was built that way. Lines out there, Rook said, voice thin with use and victory, and something Sorrel chose to hear as relief, even if he wouldn't waste a word on it. 5 miles if the ground behaves. 2 if the wind does. The wind did not care about men's plans. It brought with it the smell of rain from a storm working itself to pieces far away and the metallic sigh of wire. Sorrel tasted both and took them as a sign. The gray's stride became economy again. The world lifted in front of them in the way that means you are nearly at a ridge that promised you a view and is practicing keeping its promise. Behind them, a single shot cracked like a door slammed by a petty god. It made the gray's ear flick as if to say, some people, and then pay more attention to the ground. Rook did not look back. He gave the horse his head and then counted something in his teeth. Sorrel counted with him and discovered she was counting heartbeats, not miles. They reached the ridge and the world beyond did its old trick of being bigger than you remembered. The flat spread away like a lake built of light and mean grass. Far out, so far the mind had to squint, 2 verticals touched the sky, the kind of gate you make when you want to admit people and remind them you can also say no. Between the uprights a chain hung, and from the chain a strip of cloth moved the way tired things move when the wind can't be bothered either to love them or to kill them. The line, Rook breathed. Sorrel heard the small astonishment in it, like a laugh he'd forgotten he owned. The gray flicked an ear and put his feet into the slope with care as if it were a dress someone else owned and he'd promised not to tear. Behind them, the sound of pursuit had diminished to men arguing about whose decision had offended the evening more. The chain swayed once. Twice the cloth lifted, and a voice came from the dark beyond the posts, calm and unhurried and not angry. Which is one of the better kinds of law. State your crossing, it said, like asking a name at a neighbor's fence. Scout with a carry, Rook called back. 1 marked, 1 gray losing blood. Ambushers on the swale and hired hands behind. Who think wire is a suggestion. You're late, the voice said, and the words carried fondness, which made Sorrel's breath run strange for a second, because she had not been expected anywhere for approximately a lifetime. Blame the map, Rook said. It changed too. Make me interesting, the chain rattled. The cloth snapped once and became a banner. The space between the posts admitted them without touching their edges. The gray stepped over the threshold and lowered his head, as if he understood a kind of prayer had been spoken in a language that doesn't waste adjectives. Sorrel let her hand slide from Rook's shoulder to the gray's mane and then to her own lap. She was across. The brand on her shoulder burned and then, for the first time all day, cooled enough that she could remember it belonged to skin that belonged to her. "Welcome," the calm voice said. "We've carrots if you're horse. We'll permit care before glory." "He'll permit whatever knows its place," Rook said. And his voice did that thing again, the laugh he wouldn't spend. Sorrel opened her mouth to say thank you to whoever had decided to make gates that opened for people and animals without measuring the width of their sins first, and the night interrupted her with a sound that didn't belong on either side of a line dot. It was not a shot. It was not a horse. It was not the wind remembering last winter. It was a human sound, small and sharp and full of hurry. It came from the dark on their side of the posts, away from the chain and the men whose silhouettes meant safety. It came from the mesquite to the right, where the moon refused to be helpful. Rook stiffened under her hand. The gray's head came up. Sorrel felt her body decide to be a bell. "Rook?" A voice whispered from the mesquite and made the name sound like a question that had been folded up and kept in a pocket too long. "Is that you?" It was a boy's voice. And not just a boy's one whose words had learned to carry themselves lightly so as not to make the air harder than it already was. Rook's breath left him in a way Sorrel hadn't heard before. Not relief, not fear. Something that lives in the third place between. "Ugh," he said, and the sound of it was a story she didn't have yet. The mesquite moved, and a shape came out of it wrong. Wrong in the way a body moves when it has been asked for more than it has to give. Small, lean, left sleeve pinned. Blood making arguments down a forearm. Eyes too old for the face. Lines not clean, the calm voice at the posts called. And friendliness left it without slamming the door. "We've spill." Rook was already off the gray and moving. The boyev stumbled and caught himself on his good hand and lifted his chin like people do when pride holds their spine up. While the rest negotiates collapse. "Pike's got a man inside," F said, mouth white. "Not on your side, on ours. Took the North Trail." He turned his coat, and he's selling names. He swallowed and met Sorrel's eyes exactly once, with the concentration of a person making sure a fact is aimed where it needs to go. "And he knows yours," the night breathed in. Somewhere far out on the flats, lightning stitched two pieces of horizon briefly together, like a seamstress practicing speed. Rook's hand found Sorrel's elbow and did the opposite of tremble. "Inside," he said to the silhouettes beyond the posts. "Now." A dozen things moved at once, lantern shields lifting. Chain hauled hard to stave off shape. Whispered calls answered in the dark like stitching done without a thimble end. Sorrel felt the cool of safety slide a fraction to the left, just as a new danger put its chair in the space the cool had been occupying. She discovered that lines are not walls, they are invitations. They owe you nothing but the chance to keep walking. Rook turned his head just enough for his voice to reach only her. "I can carry you the rest," he said like a man stating the price of bread. "Or you can walk with me and learn the gate by your own steps." She looked at the posts. At the gray who'd started trembling now that he was allowed to. At the boy whose sleeve was pinned and whose mouth had just remade the night with a single sentence. At the dark beyond the fence that belonged to the kind of danger you choose, not the kind that chooses you. "Walk," she said. And stepped, even as something in the mesquite made a shape that had learned her name from a ledger and not from her mouth, and brought a gun to bear with the carefulness of a man who writes slowly because he wants his lies to look reasonable. Muzzle found her. Rook's hand found her. The chain sang an inch of warning, and a voice behind the gun said, almost pleasantly, as if he were about to purchase a bolt of cloth. "Miss Keene, don't trouble yourself. Miss Keene, don't trouble yourself." The voice was careful in the way men are when they mean for care to be mistaken for kindness. Sorrel knew the type. They pressed hot iron and called it mercy because they remembered to say please. Rook's fingers tightened at her elbow. She felt the squeeze in bone, not flesh, a signal more than a hold, and read it with the clarity of someone who has been learning his language as fast as fear will let her. "Move with me." He shifted. She shifted. The gray shifted with the resigned grace of an animal who has watched humans argue with fate and knows how to be the part of the equation that chooses balance. The man in the mesquite stepped into his own sentence. He was spare and well made in the way paper knives are. Hat brim low, coat too clean for how the night had been behaving, boots polished to a principle. His rifle sat on his shoulder like it lived there, but he held it with 2 fingers as if it were delicate. The moon gave him just enough edge to cut with. "You've had a long evening." He said it the way shopkeepers say you after counting your coins. "I'll take the burden from you and deliver Miss Keene back to a responsible authority." Sorrel kept very still. Stillness is a language too, and she liked how Rook spoke it, as decision and not surrender. She let her eyes do the moving. The mesquite to the right was darker than it should have been. 2 more shadows in it that didn't belong to plants. A third farther off who didn't bother to hide because he thought distance was honesty. Men always think distance is honesty when what they mean is insulation. At the posts, the calm voice. "Shed patience like a coat and put on readiness." "Gate," it called no name, not yet, and the chain sang as if the world had found a key it liked. Lanterns hooded themselves. The night grew competent. Rook spoke without looking at the gunman. "Names are receipts." The man smiled. "When they're written by the right hand. Yours?" Rook asked. "Mine when it needs to be," the man said, and tipped the rifle 1 inch toward Sorrel. "Not enough to threaten, enough to own. Who are you?" Sorrel asked because she believed in invoices. If a man takes your fear, make him sign for it. "Silas Quell," he said, as if the syllables were a polished spoon. "Appointed contractor to the warden's office. I offer the authority of flexibility their budget does not allow." Rook's breath changed. It went shallower, not from fear, but from calculation. "Silas Quell." The boy F had said the man selling names was inside. The man with the gun was not inside the fence. He was here between. That meant there were 2. Or 1 man with 2 bodies. Sorrel tried not to learn the shape of that thought. "Levi." Quell called mildly toward the posts. "Let's spare everyone the drama. Raise the chain handsome-like, and I'll walk Miss Keene to the warden's very civil parlor. You and I keep our agreement, and no one inside has to pretend they didn't know me when the ledgers come out." The calm voice at the gate did not answer. Another voice did, a narrow one, unwilling to be known and unable to resist. "Sir," it started. Rook's hand left Sorrel's elbow and found air. He didn't reach for his gun. He reached for the night in front of him. The way you reach for a door you know is there just before your foot finds the sill. "Levi Kren," he said as if the name were a switch he could turn off. The silence that fell inside the posts had the weight of shame in it. Sorrel felt it hit the ground like a tool dropped from a height. F made a small sound that was all explanation and no excuse. Sorrel felt the boy's body sway. The gray lifted his head and put his muzzle an inch from F's shoulder, as if he could hold the boy up with breath. Quell's smile widened. "See? Honest trade. You have something I want. I have something you want. Both of us have something we're trying not to be. What do you think I am?" Sorrel asked, because the part of her that liked to pick splinters out of words had learned that sometimes a man tells the truth when he thinks he has dressed it fine. "A message," Quell said promptly. "A warning to singers. A convenience. To men who sell jurisdiction. A story that pays on retelling." And for my purposes, a deposit I can redeem twice, once with the warden, once with the pike. 2 masters, Rook said softly. 1 leash. Quell's eyes flicked to him. Men like me keep promises because breaking them is expensive. Men like you keep promises because keeping them is expensive. We're cousins. Wrong family, Rook said. Quell's rifle moved the way a hawk moves its head when it's tired. Of pretending it's a part of the landscape. Enough talk. Miss Keen, if you please. Sorrel's body tried to remember how to obey the voice the world calls reasonable. It did that like a cough, reflexive, nearly useless. Rook's breath at her shoulder was steadier than the idea of law. She folded her hands to keep them from telling on her and felt the hot pulse under the bandage. The brand had cooled for a moment at the threshold. Quell's voice woke it as if it liked its name. Levi. Quell called again. Chain, the calm voice answered this time. Levi Kren is standing down. Calm can be a blade. The chain is not. Quell sighed, a showman disappointed in his audience. Then we do this untidy. The rifle lifted, and time stretched so thin Sorrel could see the weave of it. 2 things happened without permission. F moved. Rook moved faster. The boy's lunge wasn't brave or foolish. It was basic math. He had 1 sleeve and something like a knife, and he struck at the idea of men who sell names because that idea was trying to own his face. Rook's motion canceled F's motion without insulting it. He took the boy by the collar and turned him a 1/4 inch toward the posts, so the body that would have taken the bullet instead took Rook's shoulder. The shot cracked. The gray compressed. Breath pulled tight as wire. Sorrel's guts went to rope and then to air. Rook did not fall. He did not make a noise. He simply returned F to the ground with a gentleness that made Sorrel want to dig a hole in the night for the sake of all the things that hadn't been gentle when they should have been. Second, Quell said, because men whose hands are hired learn to count the way you count livestock. Third, Rook said, and let go of the world. He didn't fall then either. He moved in the way water moves when the ground has accidentally made a slide for it. The gray came forward into the slide because he had been trained to be a sentence that ends with the word yes. Rook's hand came up with a short-barreled pistol. Sorrel hadn't seen because she didn't know how to look for things that meant death if they were clever. He fired once. Not at Quell, at the lantern above Quell. It shattered with a satisfied sound. Darkness came down like a curtain whose owner had finally been paid. Quell swore with his whole mouth. Sorrel grabbed F with her good hand and felt Rook's other hand close over the back of her neck like a promise. This way, the posts erupted, not in chaos and choreography. Whoever commanded the gate did it with economy. 3 bodies dropped low with rifles shouldered. 2 went high. 1 called and the others answered. A hand found the gray's bridle and became another version of Rook for 3 steps. Sorrel and F were pulled through a gap she didn't see until it had closed behind them and learned the shape of her. Rook came last, backwards, left shoulder. Low, gun steady and a trail of blood under his sleeve like ink spilling from a broken pen. Quell fired again into a place where bodies had been. The bullet thunked into wood and lodged there like a dull idea. His men in the mesquite tried to make their rifles matter and discovered that shooting at a fence is not the same as shooting at what the fence has learned to keep. Chain, the calm voice said, and the metal sang with relief. Lamp. The hood lifted on the nearest lantern. Light returned in a bowl, small and sufficient. A woman stepped into it, the voice-given person. She was broad and sun-burnished, hair roped back, a scar on her jaw that had not asked permission to heal pretty. She looked at Sorrel like someone assessing a debt that she intended to pay with her own back if she had to. Maud Lark, Rook said, which meant 2 things at once to Sorrel, that this was the gate's thinker and that Rook trusted her enough to spend a name. Maud's eyes took in Rook's shoulder, F's sleeve, the way Sorrel held herself to keep her ribs from discovering panic. They took in the graze trembling and the way his left foreleg kept telling the ground that it wanted to argue. Then they flicked to the posts and beyond. "Quell," she said like a diagnosis. "Maud," he said from the mesquite, cheerful for a man whose lantern had been taught manners. "You keep the neatest gates. I tell everyone. Tell the warden," she said, "when you file for another invoice that won't pay." She tipped her chin and the lantern hood dropped. Dark again. Hands took Sorrel, firm and without insult, and put her across the yard like the idea of safety has hands. Rook resisted being handled until the gray nudged his hip hard enough to turn it into a negotiation. He yielded then, not a surrender. A deal, and let two of Maud's people take his weight as far as the long shed painted to look like small weather and big patience. Sorrel stayed at his side because gravity had decided that was how evening would go. They reached the door, and light put her in a place that had been waiting for her without making a fuss. A room of benches and a stove and a table with maps on it and a shelf with carrots at horse height and a boy sleeping under the shelf, because kitchen floors are kinder than some beds. The smell was useful. Leather, yeast, iodine, sweat you could trust, a ghost of smoke. "The gate can have me," Maud replied. She turned to Sorrel as if turning to greet rain. "You're keen." "Sorrel," Sorrel said, because her first name sat closer to the skin she still intended to keep. "As you like," Maud said. "We have 3 hours of dark worth using if the sky tells the truth. Then the line will be where it always is, and the authority will remember the distance between posts is a measure, and the measure is theirs. We need decisions before that memory." "Returns, what decisions?" Sorrel asked. She still had Rook's hand. If Ora had not ordered it, she would have refused to admit she needed to keep it. Whether to send you on with a carry team now and meet you with the second at the salt flats, Maud said, counting on a finger. Whether to hold you till dawn and move with a caravan that wants respect more than speed. Whether to split you from your name and send your name one way and your body another, because Silas Quell has a nose for the shape of a tail. Whether to spend 3 men pulling Levi Kren out of the north line before he finishing his betrayal. Rook opened his eyes. They were a color the map calls water and the day calls work. "Levi first," he said. "Names burn hotter than paper." Maud nodded. "I had suspected it was one of my tidy boys," she said with a sigh that contained iron. "The tidy ones can't abide how freedom leaves tools lying out." She looked back to Sorrel. "And you, eat. Pain as a child. Feed it, or it will scream." Gorse had the gray's leg in his lap, fetlock cleaned and blood washed away. "Nick," he confirmed without looking up, and there was gratitude in the word that made Sorrel's throat do something disobedient. "No tendon. I'll pack it. He'll hate me and forgive me in that order." "He loves carrots," Sorrel said, because she had been granted one fact about the gray that made her feel related to his survival. "Carrots after," Gorse said with gravitas. "Carrots for treaties only." Ora seared the wound with a bar. She'd heated in the stove blue, and Rook's hand crushed Sorrel's without regret. She let him crush. It seemed cheaper to pay now. The smell rose meat, salt, the old kitchen of war, and Sorrel kept her eyes on his face because she preferred any man who told the truth with his mouth to any who told it only with his hands. When Ora was done, Rook's breath did a thing. Like kneeling and standing back up. "Water," Maud said. And someone put a tin cup in Sorrel's free hand, and she drank without noticing the part of her that doesn't like to be told is the same part that needed not to faint. The door clicked. Once, a woman slid in on silence and set a box on the table like she was laying out a hand of cards no one else knew the rules for. She had dust-colored hair braided close and eyes that looked like someone else's river. "North Trail," she said. "Tracks, 1 man, 1 mule, 1 mistake. He took my canteen." Maud smiled without humor. "He always was tidy," she said. "Thank you, Wren." Wren looked at Sorrel without letting the look become a touch. "You made a horse kneel," she said as if she were reporting weather. I have wanted to do that to a man for 20 years. I only asked him to rest, Sorrel said. It came out smaller than it sounded in her head. He did the kneeling. That's all the good asking is, Wren said, and took a cup of coffee that a hand had put where her hand was going to be. The outpost operated like a body that knew which parts did which jobs. Sorrel wanted to find the person who taught this place to be itself and put her head in that woman's lap for 9 hours. Levi, Maud said, bringing us back to the road like a mother who refuses to let bedtime erase the day's story. We go. Gorse, you've got Gray in the fence. Wren with me. Rook, sit. He started to stand. He made it halfway. Ora had him back down with 2 fingers and a word that held a needle. You can track tomorrow, she said. For the next hour you can be a man who bleeds like the rest of us. I like you better that way. Take Finch, he said to Maud, reluctant but not stupid. And Das. Finch thinks like a thief but pays like a priest. Das sees shadow edges. They're at the East Pen, Maud said. They'll be glad to stop a boy from making his last mistake. Keen. The name snapped Sorrel to vertical. You sit in my room and tell my book who you are. If we lose you at the second gate, I want to be able to find you again with more than a description. Men could muddle. Your book? Sorrel asked. Maud gestured to a ledger on a shelf like a woman gesturing to a child too shy to come meet guests. Names we keep for ourselves, she said. Names we don't sell. Names that can call across wire. You can sign or I can write for you. We have both kinds of ink. Sorrel stood because the room had told her to, and because her body had learned to welcome orders that built things rather than broke them. She looked at Rook. He looked back with the unblinking attention of a man who has been making decisions for too long and finally finds one he wants to give away. Go, he said. The book's safer than the gate for the next 10 minutes. She went. Maud's room was a square that had made peace with being smaller than it wanted to be. A narrow bed, a basin, a nail with a coat on it that had 17 uses, a shelf of tins, the ledger, a pen, a cup with 2 beans at the bottom that meant somebody had been counting time by reminding herself she could choose when to stop. Sorrel sat at the table and realized her hands were shaking because they were telling the truth before the rest of her caught up. The ledger was thick with names, some careful, some scratched, some written by children who had borrowed letters and didn't plan to return them. Sorrel found the last line and wrote, Sorrel Keen. She paused, and then wrote the name Cal Bricks the way you cut your hair to keep someone with scissors from doing it for you. She wrote Mary and Rook and Maud and Ora and Gorse and Wren and F. Because the act of writing their names felt like putting stones around a fire, so no one could mistake it for a threat. The room breathed. The wall said nothing. The world outside took a step. Sorrel? F stood in the doorway like a question mark. Ora had wrapped his stump in clean cloth with a precision that would have made a book smile. His eyes were brave and badly soldered. Can I? He looked at the ledger. I'm not allowed. I'm the one who... The rest of the sentence refused to be born. Sorrel pulled the chair back from the table. Then we'll sign together, she said. I'll hold the book. You'll hold the pen. The paper can tell which hand is which. And won't worry. He came forward like a foal deciding to trust a bucket. She steadied the ledger with her palm and watched as he shaped E and P and H with stubborn care. Good, she said when he finished, and meant not the letters. Very good. Go sleep under the table like Maud told you. If you snore, I'll forgive you for it twice. F laughed, a helpless sudden thing that sounded like a diagnosis going right. He vanished. Sorrel closed the ledger and sat with it. A breath longer. The brand itched as if a new letter had been burned beside the old. Maybe that was what the book was for, to write over the words other people had put on you with ink that didn't scar. She would ask Maud when asking wouldn't cost urgency. A crack like wood breaking came from the yard. Not Quell. Inside. Sorrel was on her feet before the chair finished complaining about it. She went to the door, and the hallway gave her to the room where Rook was standing against Aura's hands, because necessity had just trumped medicine. "Stay," Aura snapped, which told Sorrel exactly how urgent the crack had been. A man slid along the wall toward the back door like a letter posted to the wrong address. He had Maud's patience without Maud's integrity and a bulge under his jacket where a coin ledger might live. He flinched when he saw Sorrel because surprise still hasn't learned when to stop visiting the wrong persons. "Levi," Rook said. A single syllable that contained not tiredness, but the memory of it. "Don't." Levi Kren didn't look like a villain. He looked like a clerk given a dungeon and told to make it presentable. "I didn't sell them all," he said to the room in general. "Only the ones who were going to get themselves killed anyway. I made them matter. You made them useful." "To the wrong story," Maud said from the doorway behind him, voice flat because flat carries the longest. She had two people with her, Ren, and a man whose beard wanted to be a religion, and all three of their faces were about to disappoint Levi in a very practical way. Levi held out the packet in his jacket like a peace offering. "Take it. Then you can say you don't need me. Then you can put me out and I'll walk. I'll walk beyond your line. I'll keep walking." "You won't," Ren said quietly. "Because men who sell names don't know how to walk without someone telling them which direction pays." He twitched then, the way rabbits do when all their options look like hawks. Sorrel saw the moment his body picked a kind of running that wasn't running at all. He went for the back door. Rook moved faster than a wounded man had any right to. He didn't reach Levi not in time to stop him with hands. He reached the latch and slammed it with his boot heel so that the door met. Frame with a finality any judge would envy. Levi bounced off the proof that there are some choices you don't get to keep. "Sit," Maud said to Levi the way you say it to a drunk you once carried out of a fire. He sat because he heard the part of the word that meant we're not done. "Finding out who you are." The door to the yard rattled again. Not because someone asked it to, because someone flung something at it. A tin cup hit and fell. Then a stone. Then a packet wrapped in oilcloth. Sorrel felt Rook's grip on her elbow. Again, instinct sent them to the floor before anyone told them to. She saw it before she knew she'd seen it. A line where the ground decided to become a different kind of itself. Ren's hand came up and the gray stopped with all 4 feet in a sentence. Now wind laid itself down. The sound of a beetle carrying. A foolish burden cut the hush and made Sorrel want to applaud. "The toll curve," Ren said. "Left of us a crust that looks like loyalty and isn't. Right of us a sink that looks like forgiveness and isn't. Between them a ribbon of honest dirt with ideas about width. Don't argue with it." Rook nodded once. Sorrel wanted to see the crust in the sink and asked the ground for its side of the story. She kept her eyes on Ren's back because she liked being alive. They entered the ribbon. It was a road in the way. Truth is a road narrower than you wish, requiring your feet and your attention both. The gray's stride shortened. Hooves placed themselves with the precision of a law clerk who intends to be remembered for the right reasons. Rook's hands weighed the reins and found the answer a hair before the horse asked the question. Halfway across, a shape detached itself from shadow at the ribbon's edge and spoke with a mouth it had borrowed from a map. "Evening," it said. "Roads closed for improvements." "Quell," Ren said softly. He was there, of course he was, because men who sell names are good at appearing exactly where the world should have told them not to. He had 3 with him. They were the sort of men who don't look like anything to save time in a lineup. One held a lantern shaded half, so the light was more promise than fact. Quell lifted his hands and arranged, his face into weary good humor. "I admire the attempt," he told Ren. "I do. You and Lark run a neat house. But tidy never beats the economics of opportunity, not in the dark." "Economics have poor eyesight," Ren said. Quell's gaze slid to Sorrel. "Miss Keene." You will not like the places beyond the second posts. They are volunteer. You don't strike me as volunteer. You strike me as someone who enjoys being asked. That's not as clever as you think, Sorrel said. The brand itched. She wanted very much to scratch it with a rag soaked in ditch water and the names of women who had refused to be asked before. Let's be efficient, Quell said. You come with me and sing a song at the warden's request. I get paid twice. Your friends keep their principal calluses. The boy with one sleeve gets to keep his bed. Which song? Sorrel asked, surprising herself and everyone else with the question. Rook's shoulder tensed under her hands. Wren's head tilted half a degree in a language that meant go on. Quell smiled like a man told his favorite meal has a garnish with his own name. Something educational, he said. Something about lines and what happens when they don't. Stay where they are put. I have one, Sorrel said, and slid from the gray before her mind had a chance to interfere. She landed with care because the ribbon did not love feet as much as it loved hooves. She stood facing Quell and let her hands hang empty to make it easier for anyone watching to pretend she was harmless. Sorrel, Rook said, and the word held all the things a man says when he has spent a day bringing you to a door and would. Prefer you not open it with your teeth. It's all right, she said without looking back. He asked for a song. He should see what the bill looks like. Wren said nothing because Wren respected a variety of suicides. Sorrel took a breath and found the same ugly note she had found for the herd. She aimed it not at Quell, but at the ground. She told the dirt what it needed to hear to remember how to be solid. She didn't ask the ribbon to widen. She asked it to be exact. Then she sang a second note, higher, aimed at nothing in particular, aimed at nerve. Quell's horse, she hadn't seen it before, because the dark had worn it so well shifted its weight as if someone had changed the slope of the world. It took a step back notionally. The man holding the lantern corrected it with a tug that indicated he hadn't noticed the way the ribbon was listening. Enough, Quell said. I don't steal converts. I buy product, price. Not for sale, Sorrel said, and let the second note creep up until it found the pitch that lives behind men's eyes. Not pain, not fear. The thing between them where choices are built. Quell's face twitched with an emotion whose name was longer than his patience. Shoot the horse, one of Quell's men said conversationally, because some men think you can end a story by taking its transport. Don't, Quell said mildly, and in that single syllable, Sorrel learned the only decent thing about him. He understood the value of a creature who hadn't lied to him yet. We don't break what brings the invoice. Then we're done, Wren said, and stooped. And when she straightened, she had 2 handfuls of dirt. She threw one to the left and one to the right, and the night told the truth about the crust and the sink. The left hissed like sugar in a hot pan. The right sighed and swallowed both handfuls with a sound that suggested it had opinions about forgiveness after all. Quell's men stepped back in synchronized good sense. Quell held his place by habit. Go, Wren said to Rook, no movement. In her voice at all, the road knows you now. Don't make it repeat itself. Rook gathered the reins. Sorrel backed toward the gray slowly because she respected the ribbon's dislike of sudden nouns. Quell watched her move with the careful interest of a man who takes measurements for a living and has just found a seam he hadn't counted on. You're making yourself expensive, he said to her as she put her foot in the stirrup Ora had begged her not to use yet. Expensive things don't get to decide who uses them. Then don't buy me, she said, and the gray lifted her without complaint, and Rook put his heel very gently to the horse's side. They went on, following Wren's thrown dirt map. Behind them, Quell's lamp floated a little while, and then went still. He wasn't done. But he had learned, perhaps, something about asking the ground to agree with his invoices. Beyond the toll curve, the flats changed their grammar. They made their sentences longer. The air thinned to the kind that makes men who like to shout discover other hobbies. Rook's breath found a fuel-saving rhythm. Ren's silhouette had the posture of someone who sees farther than vision and has learned to be at peace with it. "Why did you step down?" Rook asked at last, not chastisement but curiosity. "Because he asked for a song," Sorrel said, "and I wanted the ground to hear it." She reached forward and touched the gray's neck. Sweat cooled under her palm. "Because men like him think the world is paper. It helps when the ground remembers it isn't." Ren made a noise that might have been approval. "We're going to keep you," she said. "The second post's like useful women." "I don't know if I want to be kept," Sorrel said, and the brand itched agreement. "You'll like our version," Ren said. "It comes with keys." The second posts rose out of the dark, less like a gate than like a decision. They were taller than the first and older. The chain between them was braided of many chains, Rust telling the story of how many hands had attached how many new lengths, without asking the old links for permission. Two figures stood on either side, lamplight cupped low at their boots. They did not look surprised to see three riders who had not sent a messenger first. "State your crossing," one called, and the voice was Maud's in another mouth-comb held in a fist. "Scout with a carry," Ren answered. One marked. "One gray who thinks he's better than men, one Rook who is." "Welcome to the part where we stop forgiving paperwork," the other said, and lifted the chain. "Mind the low spot. It lies about friendship." They passed under. The ground changed again, this time to something Sorrel could feel under her feet even through the gray's back. Hospitality with rules. Buildings hunkered low, not to hide, but to refuse nonsense. A windmill grumbled like an ant who loved you and would prove it by insisting you wear a coat. A bell hung quiet, its tongue tied with a strip of cloth that said "Not tonight," the outpost. Beyond the second posts, this one people called Kestrel was a town in the way a secret can be a town. Work first, talk when possible, play when no one else is looking. Rook slid from the gray and didn't fall because Sorrel was already moving to make falling unnecessary. Ren handed Gray's rein to a boy whose eyes had decided to learn competence. "The hard way." "Carrots," the boy said gravely, and the gray sighed and agreed to be bribed. A woman came out of a low house with a light cupped in both hands, as if it were a bird. She looked at Sorrel the way women who have survived 100 small wars look at something they have decided will not be a war. "I'm Jessa Cole," she said. "I keep doors from swelling." "You'll be Sorrel Keen." Sorrel nodded because denying it would be like arguing with weather. "I was told there were keys." Jessa smiled with one corner of her mouth. "We put them on tables, not in pockets. Come inside before the dark decides to make you a sermon." They went in. The house had low beams that told tall men to mind themselves. A kettle spoke in a corner. A dog opened one eye and decided to trust Rook because the gray had. Sorrel took a stool because a chair would have asked her to pretend she meant to stay. Jessa set bread on the table and a wedge of cheese that had taken the time to become serious. "Eat," she said simply. "If anyone tries to make a speech while your mouth is full, I'll beat them with this loaf, and you can have seconds." Ren leaned against the doorframe the way a knife leans when it has earned its rest. Rook sat, with his left arm tucked and his right hand flat on the table, and ate with the concentration of a man keeping a promise to his stomach. Sorrel discovered hunger as a permission slip. "My words have been chased by men before," Sorrel said. "They still outran them." Jessa's mouth did the one-corner smile again. "Good. Then the second post will like your handwriting." A rap came at the door. Not polite. Not rude. Informative. Jessa opened to a boy with sand in his hair and urgency in his knees. He held up a tin that had once held tea and now held something the world hadn't been smart enough to sell to a different man. "For Maud," he said. "From Finch with apologies." Ren took the tin because she and apologies had an old relationship. She popped the lid and the room learned a smell that made the dog sit up and reconsider its opinions about men, oil, metal, paper burned in a friendly way. Quell's gift, she said. Finch lifted it. Clever Finch, stupid Quell. Sorrel looked into the tin and saw what cunning looks like when it thinks it's invisible. A fuse, short. A cap, mean. A charge that wanted to be friendly until it wasn't. Where was it? She asked, hooked under the third plank of Maud's. Gate, the boy said, both proud and furious. Finch stepped on it with his heel because he thinks his heels are smarter than other men's hands. Rook was on his feet before Aura's ghost could reach across counties to smack him down. He'll cede the second posts, he said. Quell has a second tin. Men like him always buy two of anything that proves itself dangerous. Jessa was already moving. Ren, she said. Top of the West Trough. Doss is on watch. Tell him his eyes aren't for decoration. Sorrel reached for the tin without thinking. The dog blinked at her and gave permission. I can find it, she said. He'll put it where a man would not look and a woman would. Somewhere pretty or polite. Somewhere meant to be background. He'll choose a place men ignore and women keep clean. Ren stopped halfway to the door and looked back. You sure? Yes, Sorrel said, and the word surprised her by being a kind of hunger, too. Rook buckled his holster with a motion that had no vanity in it at all. I'm with her. Take Burr, Jessa said to Sorrel. Gray has earned blasphemy. Burr hates explosives and will tell you so if you're about to be impolite to him. She whistled, and a shaggy dun gelding put his head in the doorway like a retired uncle who still knows where the good whiskey is kept. They went into the yard. The second post stood at their shoulders like older sisters who have not been asked, but will be obeyed anyway. Burr rolled one eye at Sorrel and then decided not to punish her for having new hands. Rook swung up like a man remembering a hymn he half loathes and half owes. Ren took the low path and vanished, the boy with sand in his hair vanishing after her because competence is contagious. Sorrel let Burr drift the way bread drifts in soup until he pointed his ears at the row of barrels by the West Trough. They were innocent as anything. They sat exactly where you put them when you intend not to think about them. One had a rag tucked under its rim, the sort of rag you use when you expect company. Pretty, Sorrel said. Polite, Rook said. Background. She finished and slid down. Burr snorted and took 2 deliberate steps backward, as if to say he wasn't being paid enough for this. Sorrel didn't blame him. She eased the rag free with 2 fingers. The tin was clipped under the stays with wire. It had a fuse coiled like a sleeping snake. It had the bad manners to weigh less than fear. We can drown it, Rook said. No, Sorrel said, because the fuse would float and invite discussion. We undo it, and then we make Quell think it worked. Rook looked at her with that unblinking attention again. You want him to relax, he said, approving. You want him to go to sleep on the wrong map. Sorrel smiled without humor. I want him to put his feet up in the wrong chair. They unhooked the tin together, slow as bedtime. Rook held his breath because sometimes that's what you give to an object to keep it from insisting. Sorrel pinched the wire free and eased the bundle into the rag, then into the tea tin, then into her imagination where it stayed, so she would remember what it felt like to be braver than she usually let herself be. Now we need an audience, Rook said quietly. We need Quell watching from where he thinks we can't see him. He is, Sorrel said. Men like him don't compose their invoices unless they get to watch you read them. He's in the tower shadow. He likes height when he can afford it. She pointed with her chin to the silhouettes beyond the far corral. Rook nodded once. He saw the same scene in the dark and liked that her eyes had learned his trick. Then we give him a show, Rook said. On 3, shout like we're fools. Ren had returned without them hearing and leaned in the shadow of the post with a handful of pebbles and a very particular smile. I've been practicing fools all my life, she said. Ready when you are. Sorrel took a breath. 3, she said, and pitched her voice high enough to tickle the gate. Fire! Rook added a profanity that made the dog in Jess's house put its paws over its ears. Wren threw pebbles at the side of the barrel so they knocked and rolled. Like success. Gorse, from the gate, swore with professional courtesy. Somewhere in the tower shadow, a shape leaned forward, like ambition smelling smoke. Sorrel held the tea tin out to Rook like a pan too hot to hold. He took it and ran with a limp that lied convincingly. He pitched the tin into the trough with all the drama a man can manage with 1.5 good arms. Water did what water does, accepted the lie, and made a believable fuss. The fuse unlit. Coiled floated up like a guilty thought. Wren slapped it with the flat of her hand and submerged it. Rook shouted again. Sorrel covered her ears theatrically and ducked as if sense had been late to the party but had finally arrived. In the tower shadow, the shape straightened and took a step backward like a man satisfied that the world contained enough truth to make his lies comfortable. Then it turned away. Now we can sleep, Wren said. And in the morning we can decide which part of Quell we cut off first. Rook's shoulders slumped the way trees do after wind. Burr sighed and put his head on Sorrel's shoulder like a dog. The second posts creaked once and settled into their own idea of rest. They did not get it. The bell that had been tied rang once. Just once. A small sound, a polite request, followed by a bigger truth. The ground under their feet hid itself. Not explosion, not quake. A push from below like a hand lifting the skirts of the town to see what was underneath. The troughs rattled. The barrels danced one step and stopped, embarrassed. The windmill coughed. The dog yelped and then barked not at anyone but at everyone. Rook's head snapped toward the east as if someone had said his name there. Wren was already moving. Jessa came out of her door with a lantern and a hammer. The boy with sand in his hair ran until he had to remember to breathe. Under, Gorse shouted, which made no sense until Sorrel saw the eastern sky change color where it had no business changing. Not dawn fire, not fire alchemy. A glow with a shape and a sound that said someone had introduced a new ingredient into the recipe of the plain. Rook threw the tea tin to the ground and stomped it with his boot for the joy of it. He's done with invoices, he said. He's writing letters. What kind? Sorrel asked, already knowing she'd hate the envelope. Flares, Wren said grimly. Signal and carry. Whoever got paid to love the warden enough to learn his new tricks is telling him the second posts are awake. How far? Jessa asked. Far enough, Rook said. His breath went very calm. And close enough. Maud is between them and us. She need us not to be where they think we are when she jogs them sideways. Then we go farther, Jessa said. We split. We spend him. We make him think we are more than we are while also being exactly ourselves. Wren, North Turn. Rook, South Gully. Keen, the earned sheriff tone again. With Rook, if your mouth can make animals do reasonable things, I prefer it next to the person who courts unreasonable trouble. Reasonable trouble, Rook corrected. Trouble that pays its taxes. Go, Jessa said, pointing the hammer at the line where the dark had lifted its skirt. We'll keep the bill collectors talking. They went, south this time, into a gully that had been cut by an argument between water and rock and had not finished speaking. Burr jumped. Down with the precision of an old actor hitting his mark. The gray followed as if gravity had written him a personal invitation. The gully took them in, and Sorrel felt the air change, cooler, closer, more opinionated. She found the note that animals use in tight spaces and set it like a table. Rook glanced back and his eyes said thank you in a language without pronouns. The gully bent. It thought about letting them out and decided to keep them until they learned something. Wren peeled away to the north at a scene Sorrel would have missed in daylight. Rook took a turn that smelled like safety to hooves and like dust to men. The glow behind them made a second horizon and then a third, the way fear makes copies of. itself when it's bored. That boy, Sorrel said when breathing had lowered its fee. He said the man inside knows my name. He knew it once, Rook said. He doesn't get to keep it. You put it in Maud's book. And if paper burns? Rook shrugged one shoulder and then remembered the other and made a face. Then the part of the world where your name lives has to carry it in mouths, he said. That's slower, but it goes farther. She sat with that. The gully made a mouth of itself and blew cool on the thought. Burr stumbled and recovered. Because he had made a promise to be dignified and was keeping it even when it hurt. Sorrel rubbed his neck and low-hummed the hurt into something that minded its manners. Warehouse. Root cellar, Rook breathed. Or cache, Sorrel whispered back. Or trap. He smiled the small half-smile that men wear when they plan to do something stupid and beautiful because it is the only sensible thing. All three, he sighed. Hold Burr. She took the reins and the horse moved against her hip like a live anchor. Rook went to the patch of ground, tested it with the heel of his palm, then set his weight and lifted. The door came up with the sound of secrecy. Being angry at being caught. The smell that came up was oil and paper and the righteous arrogance of men who think they have earned their explosions. Tin, fuse, kegs, letters, Sorrel said. And the word wanted to be a scream and a laugh. Rook looked at her with a question. That didn't waste time. Your hands steady? Yes. Then help me be rude to someone's plans. They pulled tins from the cache with the same care men use for watermelon in drought. Sorrel packed fuses into her pocket the way some women pack hairpins. Rook handed her things, and she handed him less of them back in the way of partnerships. Burr breathed in her ear. The gray shifted in Rook's hand without making a fuss because he had picked his man and was satisfied with the choice. A voice came from the corner behind them. You steal from yourself, it said conversationally. You make the world smaller when you have the chance to make it neat. Quell, Rook did not turn. He handed Sorrel the last tin and said, Run. She did not run. She set the tin down very gently and turned and said, No. Quell stepped into the near dark. His hat was off now. His hair was neat because of course. It was. He held no gun in his hands because men like him don't like to get their hands dirty. They hire other hands to envy dirt. But two men flanked him with rifles. Their mouths had the set of people who have decided not to like themselves. Later, give me my letters, Quell said. I promise I won't send them all at once. You promise badly, Sorrel said. Better than you sing, he said. And that was the only time she was glad she didn't have a rock in reach. Rook tilted his head, the way he does when testing wind. 2 shots, then 4 men. Then a mule. Then your choice. Quell raised an eyebrow. My choice? Who gets to spend you? Rook said. He was calm the way a lake is calm when you forgot it used to be a river. Spend me. Quell repeated, amused. Is that what you think this is, commerce? I think everything is commerce to a man who sells names, Rook said. Which means I can buy you if I can find your proper price. And what is that? Time, Rook said. The only coin you think you own. He moved, the gray moved, Burr moved. Sorrel moved because the world was already moving, and you don't get to stand still in a sentence like that. Rook's first shot took the lantern out of Quell's man's hand before the man had even decided where to aim it. The second knocked a rifle sideways just as it was becoming a decision. Dark came down again like an applause. Sorrel grabbed the T-tin with one hand and Burr's rein with the other. Go, she said, and the horses agreed because they were tired of men being the only ones who got to be brave. A flare went up behind the warehouse, turning the night into a medical mistake. Quell laughed. Letters, he said, everywhere. Rook didn't answer. He hauled the cache door up again with his boot, pitched a tin into the hole, and shot the fuse. It wasn't a big tin. It wasn't meant to kill a town. It was meant to talk, It did. Loud. The ground under the warehouse hit itself again. Dust fell from beams like old arguments. Quell's men flinched because flinching is a language even hired hands can remember when their mirrors are off duty. Run, Rook said now, and this time Sorrel obeyed because Burr had decided running was reasonable and the Grey had decided. Rook was right. They fled the warehouse and the glow and the new arguments in the dirt. Behind them, Quell shouted orders with the brittle fury of a man whose invoice has been slapped by a bad customer. In front of them, the South lay in wait with its own ideas. They hit the rise. The plain opened. The second posts behind them were smaller than they should have been. The first posts were beyond sight and memory. The line was in their mouths now, which is where it belongs when paper fails. They did not see the rider until he was already in their sentence. He came from the south at a pace that made Sorrel think of a wound trying to outpace its own blood. He rode a horse that had learned speed, not endurance, and was paying for it. He waved something in his hand like a man fighting bees. Rook pulled the Grey up. Burr planted all 4 feet and pretended to be a rock. The rider reached them and slid from his saddle with the collapse of waste. He thrust the thing in his hand at Rook and then at Sorrel, not seeing either of them properly. For Maud, he said. For Wren, for anyone who can read. It was a page torn from a ledger. Sorrel knew the paper by smell. It was Maud's book. Names. Not all. Enough. Enough to write a letter with. Enough to send after people who thought. The second posts were spelled safety. How? Sorrel asked, already knowing. Levi, the writer said, and vomited in the dust politely. He had a copy, in his coat, in his mouth. He looked at Rook while he wiped his mouth. With the back of his hand, he took it. He ran north. He left south to Quell. Rook took the page the way a man takes a baby he didn't know was his. He didn't look at it long. He folded it. He put it in his pocket. He breathed once. He looked at Sorrel. We split, he said. Wren goes north. I go south. You. He stopped because telling Sorrel where to go had never worked, and because he had finally learned to like that about her. Me, Sorrel said, and the word put a hand on both directions. I go where my name already is. That's both, Rook said softly. She nodded. Then I find the middle and make it matter. A sound came from the east that made every bone in Sorrel's body stiffen in ancient complicity. Not flares. Not rifles. Bells. Hushwater's bells, the ones the authority had taken down. They were ringing. Jess's dog howled back at them. The second posts swore in 7 languages. Wren appeared from the dark like an accusation that had missed you and was glad. Maud sighed. Rook asked. Fighting smart, Wren said. But they're pulling the town into it. Rusk wants an audience for his invoice. Hushwater, Sorrel whispered, and the name made itself an order. Rook met her eyes and did not argue. South can wait, he said. North can wait. The middle doesn't. He swung into the saddle. Sorrel scrambled behind him, Burr refusing. To be left and shouldering up alongside, as if he had adopted the absurdity or the people writing it. Wren ran because she preferred to beat Rook to places he thought he knew before she let him prove himself right. They turned toward the sound of bells that had no right to be ringing and every right in the world. The night opened its mouth and showed them its teeth. Sorrel took a breath to sing, not to soothe but to call, and the note that rose in her throat was one she had never used because there had never been a noise old enough to require it. And then, as if the world had been waiting to interrupt her with a timing too perfect to be anything but hatred, a figure stepped into the road 50 paces ahead. Not Quell, not Rusk. Sarsby, the deputy, his polished smile broken at last, his rifle steady for once. He had a child by the wrist. Mary Dennett's baby. Rook saw in the same instant Sorrel did. Rook's breath stopped. Sorrel's heart left her, and stood in the road by itself. Sorsby lifted the gun and the child at the same time with the cold idiocy of men who want to be villains but can only manage clerks. "Miss Keene," he called pleasantly through the night that had decided to be. "A room for murder. Don't trouble yourself with bells." He put the barrel to the child's head. "Sing," he said, and smiled. Sing. The word hung in the dust like a small cruel flag, as if Sorsby had planted it there on purpose to mark the spot where decency stopped. He had Mary Dennett's baby by the wrist, not hard enough to break, not soft enough to forget. The little arm was a thin branch in a wind that didn't care. Sorrel's mouth tasted of iron and distance. The ache in her shoulder sharpened to a pin, then spread to a plate. Rook's breath shifted against her back, the careful kind, as if even air had to be rationed this close to a boundary where one wrong word could cost a life. "Let the child go." Rook's voice was level. It had the weight of a plank you could stand on. "You deal with me." Sorsby pretended not to hear. He liked pretending. It made him feel like the world had agreed to his schedule. "Miss Keene," he repeated, polite. As a clerk selling rope, "A verse will do." The gray shifted beneath them, a question in muscle. Rook's hand slid along the rein and became answer. The night looked on with its usual indifference. Crickets scratched their names into the dark, as if that were enough to keep them from being forgotten. Sorrel swallowed and found the place in her throat, where fear had laid a hand. She lifted it off. "What's in it?" she asked Sorsby, because bargaining loves to think it invented time. "Your verse." He smiled, small and rehearsed. "Anything that puts a horse on its knees and a town on its face." He tightened his grip on the child's wrist as if to underscore the lesson. "Here's the world, and here's how you learn it." The baby didn't cry. Mary Dennett's child had learned the kind of quiet you don't teach. Sorrel felt something in her chest tear the way fabric tears when it has been pulled along a nail it didn't see. "You're going to make a mistake," she told Sorsby. He tilted his head like a man considering a wine he can't afford. "I don't make the kind that matter. You already did," Sorrel said. She moved her gaze to the horse behind him, the rangy bay with a hunger-shaped hip and a bridle stiff with old sweat. He was tied loosely to a broken fence post. His ears told the truth even when Sorsby's mouth didn't. He hated the hand-on. His reins, and he was tired of not being asked. Sorsby followed her eyes and misread the bay as a possession instead of a partner. "Don't try it," he said lightly, and lifted the rifle barrel so that its fine round mouth stared at the child's head. Rook's breath flattened to a thing without edges. His body went still, the kind of still that carries a storm inside. "It. Sorsby," he said, and the name was a door gently closing. "What?" Sorsby asked, amused at the seriousness around him. Men like him are always amused until they're not. "You going to teach me manners?" "Only if you live long." "Enough to learn them," Rook said. The boy's head tipped, as if to say, "A threat? A promise?" Sorsby liked neither, but he liked the sound of himself more. Sorrel put her hand on the gray's neck. The horse's skin twitched under her palm and steadied. She let her voice go low, the work note, the one that makes teams share weight. "Not at Sorsby, not even at the child, to the bay, to the ground under him, to the road. Easy," she breathed. "A sound as much throat as air. We're only a breath. We're not the kind that kicks. We're not the kind that breaks." The bay's ear flicked. The gentlest of movements, the smallest of admissions. He had been told all his life that listening was a woman's work, and he was no such thing. But he listened anyway. His head dropped a finger's width. Sorsby tightened the tie rope, ignorant of the moment. Behind Sorrel, the gray changed his weight by a pound, then another. He was ready. Rook's thigh was a wall at her knee. She could feel the coil in him, the held decision, the way a man stores motion and interest together and pays them out in one coin. "Sing," Sorsby said again. The word tried to make the space between them his. It failed. "Let her go" came. A voice from the left, the dark cut itself into a woman's outline. Wren, flanked by a shadow that moved like a second weapon. And I won't embarrass you in front of your boots. Sorsby's smile stiffened. This isn't your side of anything, Wren. The town thinks otherwise, Wren said. So does the line. The line thinks what the warden tells it to, he snapped. He jerked the child close, the barrel not just near the soft hair now but parting it. The moon showed its face long enough to be regretted. Sorrel saw Mary Dennett's cheekbones in the baby's profile and thought, I will not be a temple in which fear worships itself. She lifted her head and did the thing she'd sworn not to do so soon after the square. She sang not pretty, not tender. Tenderness is a luxury you bring to a day already won. She sang the note that makes animals remember they are not alone. She aimed it past Sorsby, past the barrel and the bruise, past the hungry man who thought this was the only way to be large in his own life. The sound went to the bay like water to a dry throat. The horse's eyes changed. It was a small change, the kind that lives between edges. He set his feet. He did not pull. He simply leaned. The fence post had been a citizen of this road a long time. It had suffered drought and flood, and men thinking wood is a sermon. It had rotted an inch along its base like even good things do when nobody tends them. The bay leaned on that inch. The post shifted. It was not dramatic. Large things seldom are at first. It creaked the way old structures creak when they are tired of standing for the wrong reasons. Sorsby felt it. He turned his head a hair small careless. Rook didn't move. His hands on the reins took on a meaning Sorrel had not known hands could have. The post leaned farther. Don't, Sorsby said, to the horse, to the night, to the idea that anything might happen that he hadn't scheduled. His grip on the child's wrist tightened. The baby made a tiny sound like a question getting lost. Sorrel changed the note. She gave it the shape of a gate opening. She would not bow his horse for him. She had learned that lesson. But she would ask the ground to remember mercy. The bay took a breath you could hear from where she sat, and then he did the smallest large thing. He took 2 steps backward, not hard, not panicked enough to set the rotten inch into its destiny. The post tore free. The rope snapped at the fee. Momentum did the rest. Sorsby stumbled just enough that gravity remembered its job. Rook moved. She felt it at her knees first, then in her teeth. The gray leapt forward like a second decision. Rook's right hand left the rein long enough to take the rifle's sight line and throw it to daylight. He didn't strike Sorsby. He struck the gun. Metal rang against bone. The barrel skittered sideways and the shot went up and harmless. And the baby was a weight in the air for a beat too long. Wren was there to catch her. Her hands did not flinch. Some women's hands never have that habit to break. Sorsby spun, stupid with surprise. Men who love procedure are always its last victims. Rook stepped through him. He didn't hurt him more than the lesson required. We are not Pike, his economy said. He took the deputy's collar and the rest of his dignity with it and put Sorsby on the ground with the sort of respect you reserve for a sack you don't want to spill. Done, Rook said to the night. To his own temper. To the part of him that had wanted harder justice. Sorsby made a sound like a man trying to cough up pride. Wren passed the baby into Sorrel's arms. Quick as a lamp wick passing flame, weight, warmth, the tiny, outraged heart. Sorrel's lungs forgot their occupation just long enough to decide on another. The child's head tucked itself under Sorrel's chin like a creature burrowing into a burrow it had invented. Mary, Sorrel whispered without meaning to. She kissed the baby's hair and tasted dust and something sweet soap or luck. Give her, Sorsby said, and with one hand still caught in the collar, Rook's other hand found Sorsby's jaw and stopped it being a mouth and made it be a face again. Talk and you don't learn, Rook said. Listen, and you might. Who taught you to think that's different? Sorsby snarled from behind Rook's fingers. The lives you bring into pain, Ren said softly, and that seemed to find a joint in Sorsby's posture and loosen it. For a heartbeat he looked like a boy, and then he remembered his job and put the mask back on that men, like him, glued to their bones. The bay shook, snorted, trotted 3 steps and stopped as if embarrassed to have taken part in a morality play. Sorrel sang once, softly, a thank you that belonged to the 4-legged. He put his head down and began to graze on a weed he didn't like as a way to pretend he didn't care whether anyone approved. Rook, Ren said. She had her face turned to the south. It had the set it gets when she smells a lie before it's spoken. Quell, he would, Rook said, not a question. He hauled Sorsby to his feet and pushed him toward the fence. Hands on wood, less reason to use them. You can't, Sorsby began. I can, Rook said, and will. And I'm impatient to be done with you. He glanced at Sorrel and the child in her arms. We move. Sorrel's body surprised her by knowing exactly how to hold a baby on a horse behind a man who'd just disarmed the wrong kind of deputy. 1,000 women she had never met ran their hands through her spine and set it right. The child nestled and made a tired sound that meant the world hadn't entirely failed tonight. Ren ghosted into the ditch, a blade slicing the dark without insulting it. The gray accepted his increased cargo with a brief huff that meant, fine, but I get carrots twice. Rook swung up, reached, lifted Sorrel, felt herself hand the child to her own hands again. If that made sense, and it did, which frightened her. More than the gun had. She settled, cradled, and put her cheek to the soft cap of hair, and counted. In, out. Make a rhythm and live in it.